Let's do it.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, so if you could please take your seats.
Don't do that.
Don't do it, Mark.
He's having too much fun at breakfast.
I know.
Don't call Liza Jane honey.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to day 2 of the October 2025 quarterly Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board meeting. The meeting is being streamed live on OWEB's YouTube channel, and it is recorded. Meeting materials are in the board and committees section of the OWEB website, and viewers can click on the relevant board meeting date and have access to all of the meeting materials. We have a relatively short agenda today, so we've got a couple items. We're going to take public comment first. We'll move into a water acquisitions panel. We'll have committee updates from the committee co-chairs. We're going to hear about the Focused Investment Partnership Ecological Priorities update. We will move into an LA Modernization update and have other business and adjourn for the day. So with that, we're going to move into our first agenda item for today, which is item H, public comment. So I'd like to thank the commenters from yesterday that provided verbal comment here at the board meeting. I'll remind folks that they have, the board members may ask clarifying questions only. I will call public commenters up by name and let you know who is up next so folks can be prepared. We'll provide up to 3 minutes for each commenter. And I do just want to also acknowledge for this quarterly meeting, we received 3 written comments. So we received comments from the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts with Joe Buttafuoco, Jefferson County Soil and Water Conservation District with Ellen Hammond, and also the Nehalem Basin Partnership with Rob Walton's comments on the FIP ecological priorities that we'll hear more about today. So with that, the order for public comment this morning is Joe will be up first, followed by Natasha, and then Ann, which I believe is online. So Joe, your comments, please.
Never get it in on time. Good morning, Co-Chair Stokes, Co-Chair McClary, and members of the board. For the record, I'm Joe Buttafuoco, Executive Director of the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. Thanks for the opportunity to provide public comment. I want to thank Bruce and Liza Jane for your service to OWEB and the state of Oregon. I also want to congratulate Lindsay for stepping into the co-chair role. COLE is a nonprofit membership organization that serves and strengthens the land trust community in Oregon. We represent 32 member organizations, including land trusts, SWCDs, and other organizations working across the state. Together, our members have worked to protect over 780,000 acres of land. Today, I'm going to share some thoughts regarding our work with the Acquisitions, Restoration, and Emerging Issues Committee. I'm going to say ARE after this, to modernize the Measure 76 land acquisition program. First, I want to acknowledge the hard work that OWEB staff have put into this program and also into this effort to make improvements. I want to express gratitude to OWEB for that. The improvements to the application process initiated last spring have already had an impact. We saw applications rise to this recent open solicitation. I believe there were 9 applications totaling $12 million. And based on our surveys of projects in the pipeline, the need's even greater. We worked with OWEB staff and our members to facilitate a panel for the September ARE meeting. The panel included a presentation from the Land Trust Alliance Accreditation Commission Director about the Land Trust accreditation process. This presentation conveyed the rigorous and comprehensive nature of this process and how these national standards and practices establish strong land trusts equipped to successfully conserve and steward lands in perpetuity, and also to manage the risks associated with this long-term conservation. We also had 4 land trust staff speak to past issues. COLE is working with its membership to not only highlight issues, but to provide specific solutions. This is a work in progress. We'll have a clearer idea of the solutions as we move forward. There were some preliminary ideas in our October 23rd ARE testimony. But, big picture, we're just looking for more trust and partnership, more focus on achieving conservation outcomes, and less on managing risk. It's our hope that OWEB views land trusts as key partners to realizing the vision of Measure 76 land protection goals. Land trusts have the expertise and capacity to restore and steward these lands in perpetuity, and also to manage any risks to conservation values over time. We're in the midst of a generational shift in land ownership. There will be many more opportunities to protect working lands and prevent development in places important to conservation. We're ready to rise to this challenge, and we look forward to partnering with OWEB to realize significant conservation wins in the years to come. So we're going to keep working closely with the ARE and look forward to more conversations as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joe. Any clarifying questions from board members?
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thanks.
And may we please have Natasha Bellis?
Good morning, co-chairs, Coates and McClary, members of the board. My name is Natasha Bellis, and I serve as the Conservation Director for Deschutes Land Trust based in Bend. I'm here today representing both the Deschutes Land Trust and the Deschutes Partnership, which includes the Land Trust, Deschutes River Conservancy, and the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council. My comments today center on our deep appreciation and support for OWEB's continued investment in strengthening program efficacy. On behalf of the Deschutes Partnership, I'd like to express our strong support for the proposed changes broadening the FIP ecological priorities, particularly the change from aquatic habitat for native fish species to aquatic habitat for native species. The partnership is finalizing a strategic action plan focused on restoration efforts to support the threatened Oregon spotted frog in the Upper Deschutes subbasin. And this update will enable us to pursue the long-term investment necessary to accelerate the pace and scale of restoration in this critical area. On behalf of the Land Trust, I want to acknowledge and deeply appreciate the leadership of OWEB staff and the board's Acquisition, Restoration, and Emerging Issues Committee for their work with the Land Trust community to modernize OWEB's land acquisition program. This effort has required deep reflection from both OWEB and the Land Trust community, and we're grateful for the opportunity to partner in evolving the program to fully realize the vision and potential of Measure 76's land protection goals. This process calls for bold innovation, and candidly, it can be a bit messy. And I want to thank the ARE committee for their patience as we work together to develop clear, actionable recommendations that will result in land acquisition program that is grounded in trust, partnership, and transparency. So we remain fully committed to this effort and to navigating this path collaboratively with OWEB. And then lastly, in the spirit of celebrating our wins, I'd like to echo the board's recognition yesterday of OWEB's contribution to wildfire resilience. Land trust properties were significantly affected by this past summer's cram fire on Trout Creek in the lower Deschutes, and the flat fire on Whitechoose Creek. OWEB's partnership in land protection and stream restoration in these areas helped reduce fire intensity and in many cases served as a fire break. On Whitechoose Creek, areas that were restored by the Land Trust and our partners at the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, they stand out as a ribbon of green, literally in a sea of charred landscape. It's truly remarkable. And this provides essential refuge for fish and wildlife as we move into post-fire recovery efforts. So we're deeply grateful for OWEB's continued partnership and support. Thank you so much for your time and your ongoing commitment to protecting Oregon's lands and waters. And thank you, Liza Jane and Bruce, for your service on this board. You'll be missed.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for Natasha? Oh, Liz.
Natasha, thank you for mentioning, is the fire resilience piece in the work that has made a difference, is that posted anywhere on your website? I'd like to share that back.
Yeah, I would be happy to forward that. We have written a couple of blog posts. I believe I have a board member now that will hopefully be able to share photos of drone imagery of Whitechoose Creek. So yes, I'd be happy to send you some resources.
Love to have it, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much for your comments today. And then I believe we have Ann Richardson online.
Yes, good morning. Am I able to share my screen? I would like to share that photo that Natasha referenced with you.
If you can, yeah. Just a minute.
I'm not,
She needs to accept
Can you accept the invitation to share your screen?
to promote to panelists.
Oh, promote to panelist.
Okay, yeah, she'll be turning her screen on this side. She is muted now.
You should be able to see on the bottom of your screen a little green share button up. There you go.
We can see the picture. That's great.
I don't know that she's muted still.
You are still muted, Ann. Are you able to unmute yourself?
unmute. Okay, how's that?
Wonderful.
Great. Well, my name is Ann Richardson, and thank you for allowing me to address you this morning. I'm the board president for the Deschutes Land Trust. I'm a Sisters resident, and I neighbor one of the land trust's preserves, Aspen Hollow. And on behalf of the land trust, myself and my fellow Sisters community members, I wanted to thank the OWEB board for your longstanding investment in conservation on Washus Creek. Your support's been instrumental in protecting and restoring a resilient and healthy watershed, one that's proven, and most recently during the Flat Fire, to really have incredible value. As you can see in the photo that I've shared, it's a pretty dramatic image of our Rimrock Ranch Preserve. And after decades of collaborative land protection and restoration, including OWEB-funded projects, the Washus Corridor now provides critical ecological benefits that help reduce the fire severity and habitat loss, and provided these natural buffers protecting nearby communities and homes, one of which was mine. These communities are exactly what strategic science-based conservation makes possible. I can tell you from looking at this photo that part of Washus Creek that I border, which is not on restored lands, looks extraordinarily different. It's very black with lots of ash and big black sticks. So the restoration makes an incredible difference in the vitality of the Washus Creek corridor. And we deeply appreciate OWEB's continued commitment to investing in watershed health and community resilience. The Washus Creek story demonstrates how restoration, it's not only about fish and wildlife, it's about protecting people and property and the landscapes that we all love. So we all thank you so much for your partnership and your vision in making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and for that photo. And I can see it has sparked some questions. So I'm going to go to Mark Webb and then Russ.
Thanks, the photo was fantastic. And can you tell me which direction the fire was going roughly? Was it parallel to the creek there, or was it going across? I'm just curious about the fire behavior.
In that photo, I'm not 100% certain. I live upstream from here, so I know that it was going upstream, but Natasha might have a better sense of the direction there. I do believe it might have been moving across and up at the same time, because it did, this was a day or so before it landed further upstream. Natasha, I don't know if you have a better answer for that one.
It was moving through the canyon to the west.
Natasha says it was moving through the canyon to the west.
Thanks.
Russ.
And thank you. This is a very informative image. It shows of significant hope that we're moving in the right direction in terms of fire-adapted communities and systems. And I'm curious if, by chance, anybody dropped temperature cones prior to the fire to get a sense of the nature of the fire as it hit the ground.
That is so beyond my pay grade, sir. I might toss that one to Natasha as well.
I don't know.
And she says she doesn't know. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Not seeing any. Thank you so much for your public comment today.
You're welcome, and thank you all.
Okay, at this time, we are going to move into agenda item I, which is the water acquisition panel. It starts at page 42 on your board book, so I'd like to invite Renee and Brian up and welcome the panelists that are here with us today.
All right, good morning, co-chairs, members of the board. For the record, Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWEB. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, co-chairs, OWEB board. For the record, Brian Walcott, Water Acquisitions Coordinator and Capacity Grants Coordinator.
Shortly, we'll have our guests introduce themselves as they kick off their presentation. So just by way of quick orientation and a few logistics before we dig in. So we're on agenda item I, the staff report starts on page 42 of your ebook, focused on a water acquisition panel discussion. So quick reminder, water acquisition investments is one of the constitutional directions to the agency. The intent of those investments is to address flow restoration and water quality needs, given how critically important stream flow is to native fish and wildlife species. So in addition to investments through Measure 76 in 2022, there was a legislative investment to increase even more the resources available for the water acquisition grant program. So we've run 3 grant cycles since that time, and just 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, we closed the solicitation for the 4th grant cycle. So it's very exciting. We've had some robust conversations at the last few board meetings about water acquisitions, including questions about ecological considerations, cost considerations, among other things. So Brian, if you want to advance to the next slide. So we talked in July, what better way to get some of those questions answered than to have before you a panel of technical experts, project developers, so that they can share their thoughts about how they really do balance ecological, cost, design considerations as they're scoping, developing, valuing, reviewing, and implementing water acquisition projects. So we expect that the panel discussion today will absolutely benefit staff and board, hearing from and talking with these folks, but also we're kicking off a rules advisory committee process for the water acquisition grants. We have our first RAC meeting next week, so expect it'll help inform that process too. So in terms of logistics, we have limited space and we have 6 panelists. So we're having folks come up in pairs. We'll ask each speaker to introduce themselves as they start their presentation. We have 75 minutes total. We expect we'll have at least 20, if not closer to 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. So our request is please keep questions to clarifying questions in the middle of the presentation so we can keep things moving ahead. Brian will be advancing slides. I'll be handling timekeeping, so I'll give folks about a 1-minute warning so we can keep moving. We'll then at the end ask all 6 panelists to come up. Brian and I will go to the front row. If you have questions for staff, we're happy to pop up, but my guess is many of your questions will be for these experts you have before you. So just huge gratitude for these folks for traveling quite long distances to be with us in person today. The fact that we have all 6 in person is amazing. So really look forward to the learning and the dialogue with them. And my estimate, and this isn't aging anyone on the panel, but I gather we probably have at least 100 years of experience with these 6 folks. So let's take advantage of that and learn and listen to how they think about development and implementation of water acquisition grant projects. So with that, I'll turn it over to Spencer.
Sure thing. Good morning, co-chairs Coates and McClary, members of the board, Director O'Brien. My name is Spencer Sawaski. I'm the Habitat Division Deputy Administrator at ODFW. I'm going to attempt to give some background on why keeping water in stream is important biologically, the status of flow deficits across the state, the current status of flow restoration, as well as a sneak peek at an ODFW statewide prioritization. And I'm going to attempt to do that all in 4 slides in 5 minutes, so bear with me. So to begin with, water is of course a primary limiting factor for a lot of our listed aquatic species. The figure on the left is showing an extreme example of flow variations. And so what's going on here, aside from just a free-flowing stream to a dry stream, is that as flows reduce over the course of the summer, be it either naturally or exacerbated by withdrawals, we have a reduction in discharge and volume, which results in a reduction in available habitat. And with that, there's increased competition of the species that live within the system. There's increased susceptibility to predation and disease. There's also a limitation on movement of these organisms throughout the system. And at the same time as we have these reductions in stream flow, we also have typically increased issues with water quality, and namely water temperature for our cold water loving species. As the volume of water declines, you have a reduction in the thermal mass of the water system, so it takes less energy to heat that water up. Now, what I've just described happens naturally in most of our systems. We have this snowmelt recession, we have systems that receive less precipitation, and so we have this natural decline in stream flow and habitat, but that can really be exacerbated based on how much out-of-stream withdrawals occur in the system. So some of you might be thinking, well, given we know that less water is bad, how do we determine how much water we should leave in stream? And there's a whole field of science associated with that. ODFW conducts a lot of those types of studies. But there's a growing body of literature that suggests that somewhere around keeping 80% of stream flow in stream is the threshold beyond which we see some really cascading ecological impacts. So if there's less than 20% of the water removed, we're in pretty good shape. So keep that 80% threshold in mind as I go through the next slides, please. So these two maps are based off of OWRD, so the Water Resource Department, excellent catalog of water rights and stream flows across the state. I'll try to walk through these pretty quickly. What that database catalogs is estimates for all of these subwatersheds of the natural flow, so how much water would be in these streams in the absence of any diversions. It also catalogs how much water is taken out based off of legal water rights, and then it also calculates what is expected to be left over, so essentially after the water rights have been removed from the system. So the figure on the left is showing the ratio of the expected flow to the natural flow. So a value of 1 indicates that expected flow is equal to natural flow, meaning there's no diversions, everything is left in stream. And a value of 0 means everything's taken out of stream. The water rights are dewatering the entire stream. And then if you recall that 80% value I talked about in the last slide, the subwatersheds in blue are where there's a ratio of 0.8 to 1, meaning somewhere between 100% and 80% of the water is left in stream. So in terms of flow quantity, they're in pretty good shape. Everything else below that is some measure of impaired based on water quantity, with the red being the most notable, where the value is 0 to 0.25, indicating anywhere from 75 to 100% of the water is being legally diverted from the systems. Now, the figure on the right is using similar data, but in this case, it's trying to quantify the amount of CFS, and I apologize if the legend is small. It's saying if we use that 80% of natural flow as a target to achieve, to leave in stream, how much water would need to be restored back in stream to achieve that target? So as would be expected, it's the larger main stem rivers that have the highest values, so the Rogue, the Umpqua, et cetera. Next slide, please.
Spencer, you've got a couple minutes.
Okay, I will hurry. So hopefully I've imparted the fact that flows are important. There's some big deficits across the state. So here's a quick snapshot of the current status of work to put water back in stream. I'm going to try not to steal too much thunder from an OWRD on his slides, but this is cataloging all of the legally transferred water rights across the state through OWRD. It certainly doesn't incorporate all of the other great work going on outside of OWRD. I'm going to skip over the map and focus your attention to the table on the right. So this is broken down by ODFW Fish District. The second column, the sum of the deficits, that again is that amount of water that we think needs to be put back in stream by district to achieve that 80% target of natural flow, so good ecological shape. The third column, the Ag Full Certificate, is how much has actually currently been put in stream. And then the last column is the ratio of the two, showing sort of your percent achievement of that target. There are some notable locations where we see 10 to pushing 20%, which is great, but overall, I kind of focus on that bottom right statistic, which is roughly 4%, indicating we're in a pretty big hole when it comes to our need and achievement of flow restoration efforts. I'll go to the next slide. So hopefully I've demonstrated the impacts of not having flow, the status of both the deficits as well as the flow restoration work going on. Because of all of that and the limited resources we have, a few years back, ODFW endeavored to update our flow restoration prioritization for the state to try to really focus efforts with limited resources on where we think water is most impactful to put back in stream. Without going into too much detail, I'll just quickly go over the main primary inputs to this model prediction. So we have the current flow status. Again, that's that ratio of expected to natural flow. The presence of cold water within the subwatershed, as well as the count of native salmonids. So subwatersheds that are currently heavily dewatered, so that value is very low, the 0 to 0.25 or less than 80%, are prioritized the highest. Subwatersheds are identified to have cold water now, as well as at the end of the century with climate change in mind. And then also watersheds which have the highest relative count of native salmonids. So subwatersheds that have more species essentially are prioritized the highest. The model is complete. It's currently being reviewed by our district biologists. We expect to have a final product published early 26. And just as a final note, the point here is to really focus efforts statewide on these systems that we think are going to be most resilient and impactful to put water back in stream. With that, I will turn it over to Anton.
Thanks, Spencer. Good morning, co-chairs, members of the board. My name's Anton Kiono, and I'm the Habitat Project Conservation Leader for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And to Renee's observation that you have more than a century of experience before you today, I'll only say that's because we all started doing this when we were about 5 years old. You've had to suffer me on this topic at meetings past, so I'll spare you too much of that. But I did just want to kind of kick us off after Spencer gave that great overview of the problem. Just talk about some of the context with the solution and some of our experience at the Confederated Tribes with working toward that solution. The tribes have worked as both a funder, a developer, and implementer of stream flow restoration projects for the last almost 20 years. And we've really endeavored to do that collaboratively. This isn't because of some high-minded ideal or commitment to working together. It's pragmatism. When we work together collaboratively, we grow trust with the community members whose support is so important to this. We implement solutions starting now. We don't wait for litigation to run its course. And we don't have the time. The resources don't have the time to wait for adversarial approaches to play out. The tribes don't have the time for adversarial approaches to play out. As you know, of course, fish are very important to many of Oregon's tribes' culture, traditions, livelihoods. They don't have the luxury to wait for court proceedings to go through. So this is all to say, something you know well, that it's so important that we have this collaborative approach, that we're able to make it work. But that's not to say it's the only approach. So with that in mind, I'd just like to underscore how important programs like this OWEB funding program is to stream flow restoration. Really, we want to see this succeed. We have to see this succeed. We don't want to be left with only the alternative. And again, the tribes don't have the luxury to wait, so we have to work toward flow restoration however we can. We hope it's not an adversarial approach, but that's definitely one of the tools that are out there. Collaboration is so much better. As was mentioned, you have sort of the brain trust for the state of Oregon when it comes to stream flow restoration before you today. And somehow they managed me to slip in here too. But I just encourage you, take advantage of that. Ask those hard questions. You have the people here who've thought about this for a long time, since we were 5 years old, to really dive into those details if you have those questions. So with that, I'll turn it back to the experts and just thank you again for your time here this morning and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Spencer and Anton. So we will invite Jessica and Chris up next. Go ahead, Jess.
Good morning, Chairs Coates and McCleary and OWEB board members. My name is Jessica Humphreys. I'm the Oregon Flow Restoration Director with Trout Unlimited. And I'm happy to have the opportunity today to talk about how we prioritize the areas where we implement this work and how water transactions are developed. This first slide here was developed by the Columbia Basin Water Transaction Program and outlines kind of the overall high-level approach to how flow restoration transaction development proceeds. And outlined here, it indicates that the first important step is to build trust in a basin and understand the needs of the water rights holders, determine which tools work best for which transactions, in which locations, and with which landowners. That could be permanent, short-term, conserved water, or other types of transactions like forbearance agreements, minimum flow agreements. We have to get creative sometimes to make progress. And then those transactions are developed and proposed, considering and consulting on legal, economic, and the monitoring terms of the agreement with all the experts in the community to make sure it's a solid proposal. And then if the transaction type calls for it, we seek state agency approval. The funding for the project is released, and ultimately, hopefully, river flows are improved. The highlighted example in this photo is from the Middle Deschutes, and the Deschutes River Conservancy has worked in this reach for more than 20 years to improve flows. And through more than 98 individual transactions, a mix of temporary, permanent, and conserved water, they've restored 135 CFS during summer months, with ongoing capacity and transaction support from programs like CBWTP. So it's always fun to brag on a partner and folks that we get to work with regularly. But I really think this is an excellent example of how flow restoration can work and does work in Oregon. An established entity with capacity and expertise to pursue and develop these projects, working in a community over a long period of time, building the trust and finding the projects that work for in-stream and out-of-stream needs. I think this example also highlights the importance of having multiple different tools available to achieve our goals and having a consistent presence of a qualified and committed organization in the basin to usher these transactions through over time. Next slide, please. So I'd like to step back and look at how Trout Unlimited prioritizes where we work in the state and within individual basins, and then dive a bit deeper into transaction development. TU's Flow Restoration Program works in multiple basins throughout Oregon, and we have strategically focused our capacity where there's an identified in-stream flow restoration need and a lack of capacity to perform the work. Very excited to see Spencer's presentation and have that data out there for us. That will filter into our work significantly. And in addition to that, where we're already working, NOAA biological opinions and recovery plans have often been guiding documents for initially prioritizing those areas, as are local basin-specific restoration documents and restoration partnership prioritizations. TU's model has been to establish project managers in the basins they will be working in and to coordinate closely with restoration partners like ODF&W and OWEB to further refine priority tributaries and reaches within the basin and adapt over time as we get more information and like these studies that Spencer just presented on. Next slide, please. This map just shows briefly the basins we're focused on a large scale. And you can see that it does overlap pretty closely with a lot of the areas highlighted in red on Spencer's maps. But this shows TU's current priority areas. We have project managers focused in the Wallowa Basin, Upper Grand Ronde, Catherine Creek, Umatilla, John Day, and Rogue Basins. And they also are indicative of TU's priority waters, where we also have implementers working on physical habitat restoration. We like to have flow restoration overlap with those efforts to achieve the greatest ecological uplift possible. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, Jess.
And then I just want to circle back to actual details of transaction development. We had kind of the high-level overview on the first slide, but then we do kind of get into the nitty-gritty of individual transactions, trying to make it work, trying to achieve and work towards our goals. So once we have a basin identified and we have capacity established, we perform water rights analysis, look at the in-stream targets that may have been set by entities or professional knowledge in the basin, and then prioritize where we're going to focus our efforts to get the greatest ecological benefit. And then we're in the basins and we're working with landowners, we're establishing relationships with other restoration partners, landowners, and once we get interest and an opportunity identified, we're going to work through with the landowner everything from their land management goals to past water use, what they're looking for in the future, what's going to work for their operation and their future plans. We look at the water rights and vet the validity of the water rights on the property and the impacts they could have in stream. We evaluate the long-term project potential, like, can this go anywhere that will have long-term benefits for the stream? And we also look at community perception and the relationships within the basin. So it's important that we can bring as many tools, options, and ideas as possible to the table when we're speaking with landowners. But mostly, we spend a lot of time listening and understanding what the community needs, what they value, what their concerns are. Because it is critical for our work that we understand those things so we can evaluate how a project will fit in with the community, how it will be perceived. Because ultimately in these basins, we're not going to usually work with one landowner and achieve our goals. We're going to want to work with a lot of people in the community. And as Chris will discuss next, any of our transactions that go through OWRD application process have a stringent injury analysis. But we know that even negative perception of a project or perceived impact can really impact what we can do in the future and how we can achieve our goals. So we try to evaluate and mitigate for that early on in the process as much as possible and practical. And just overall, water transactions take a long time to develop. They often start smaller short-term and evolve into something more in the future. At least that's the goal. In Catherine Creek, we've worked with a landowner for about 15 years. They've done multiple leases, multiple time-limited transfers, and then in 2026, we're going to be applying to permanently protect the acres involved in those transactions, which will protect about 2 CFS in Catherine Creek. So what ultimately gets us to these durable long-term solutions in our high priority areas is consistent capacity to maintain relationships and support these projects as they evolve over time. We can't come and go in the basin and really maintain the relationships needed to have success. And the last thing I'll say is that every transaction is very different and exists in the context of its basin. 1/4 of a CFS or half a CFS in a small tributary in the Rogue can have just as much impact as maybe 5 CFS in the main stem John Day. So very individual and exist in the context of the basin and the landowner that we may be working with. I appreciate the time today and I'm looking forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris.
Good morning, Co-Chair Coates and McClary, members of the board, Director O'Brien. Pleasure to be here with you this morning. For the record, my name is Chris Coates. I'm the North Central Region Manager for the Oregon Water Resources Department, coming to you from Pendleton. Woody and Jess, I think, get the furthest traveled in the state of Oregon at least, but really happy to be in Astoria with you this morning. So I want to talk with you as succinctly as I can about an issue that I could probably spend all morning discussing, and that's kind of the state of Oregon's flow restoration program, which is housed within OWRD. Next slide. So there were discussions in the legislature dating back into the early 1950s contemplating how the state should think about and address water needed for aquatic species. There's a lot of history there that I'm going to have to skip over, but what I really want to focus on is that all that work culminated in the passage of the in-stream Water Rights Act in 1987. If you are interested in the statutory rule, a little light reading, I have that cited there. That's not the only area that in rule where there are in-stream programs that are discussed, but that's really the foundational piece of what this program has been built on over the years. We really are proud of the program in Oregon. It really is a pretty outstanding program when you look at how other states in the West deal with this. We don't want to, there's work and improvement certainly that we can do, but we really feel proud of this program and the work we're able to accomplish with partners like Jess and the tribes and others. Next slide. All right, so just a little grounding in what is in the program, and when we say these words, what do they mean? These are the primary elements when we think about in-stream water and how we protect for it and how it is placed in water or in-stream. And 2025, what are the program tools that we have? So the first four bullets there are processes that are generally initiated by the water right holder, often working with someone like Jess, to get an application into the department. So these are water rights that are certificated, so that's kind of the final step in the water rights process. Has to be a water right that we call subject to transfer, so you have to be able to demonstrate that you've used it in the last 5 years beneficially. And then there's an application process where you spell out, what do you want to do? You want to put part of your water right or your full water right in stream, for how long, quantities, etc. That can be time limited, so a lease is generally I would say the simpler way to put water in stream. You can do that for up to 5 years. In-stream transfers are generally permanent. We do have time limited in-stream transfers. If you want to put your water in stream for more than 5 years, you can use that tool. Allocation of conserved water is an irrigation efficiency program where you can become more efficient, and part of the efficiency that you've gained, that water goes in stream. And then split season leases allows an irrigator and sometimes somebody like a city to use part of their water right or their water right for part of the year, and then the rest of the year that water goes in stream. And there's pretty stringent metering and reporting requirements, so we make sure we're not enlarging the right. The next two on the list here are not generally initiated by the water right holder. So in-stream water rights, as codified in the 87 Act, can be applied for by Parks and Recreation, Department of Environmental Quality, or Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And those are for, they have to define what the reason is, and that's all laid out in statute. Generally, what we've seen more recently is ODF&W applying for in-stream water rights around the state. I can't recall one from DEQ recently, but certainly they have the statutory ability to do that if they choose. And then minimum flow conversions were the precursor to in-stream water rights. So minimum perennial stream flows were established in that gap or that time period between the 50s and the 80s, where there were established quantities of water that were identified for a number of basins around the state. And those have been, most of those have been converted into in-stream water rights. We still have some in the Willamette, some in the Umatilla. Next slide. All right, so how do we do the things that I just laid out? So as with all actions that the department takes, they have to be noticed. So there's a notice process to the public so they know what we're doing. It provides the opportunity for people to weigh in if they so choose or want to provide comment. Where we really spend a lot of time when these transactions hit our desk is like we would do with any other water right. And I think it's important, the piece that the act did is it elevated, I would say, in-stream water transactions and in-stream water to the same level of beneficial use that you would think about for like an irrigation right. So in the eyes of the department, post 1987, putting water in stream is the same thing as irrigating your crop. That beneficial use criteria was established for in-stream water. So when we're thinking about transactions where you're changing how you're using your water, whether that's from you're moving it from field to field, or you're taking your water right, picking up and putting it in stream, our process for evaluation looks similar, even though the criteria might be slightly different depending on what the change is contemplating. But at the base of all of that, whenever a water right holder is changing their water right, we have to make sure that change doesn't impact other water right holders negatively. And so we could call that our injury and enlargement review. So you can't injure, you can't harm another person's ability to appropriate water they are legally entitled to, and you can't enlarge your rights. So if you're going to put water in stream, you can't then irrigate the land that it was pertinent to before. That's pretty obvious enlargement. That makes your water right bigger than it was, than it allows under its right. And then we have to think about how do we protect that water in stream, and that's laid out in the lease as well. So there are often, Jess and DRC and others will work, and it may take, they may be small quantities that are transacted, and we have to say, hey, we can protect that past other users. We have to be able to kind of keep the color of the water separate, so we know, hey, this is in-stream water. We need to get to the mouth of, whatever creek it's going into. So we have to be able to document how that is protected. All that goes into this injury and enlargement analysis to make sure that what we're doing fits within, that kind of general criteria, that we're not harming another irrigator or another water user's ability to use their water.
Chris, you have 1 minute.
Okay, I'm almost there, I promise. This is my last slide. So there are just a few criteria here I thought were important to highlight for the group. So people think water right is a water right, but really in the system of prior appropriation, many water rights aren't honored, are not, the water is not available under that right. I like to remind people, love it or hate it, prior appropriation really is a water allocation tool. And what prior appropriation did was allocate water irrespective of its availability year over year. And so there are years where we are regulating back to priority dates that are in the mid to late 1800s. So when you're thinking about protecting water in stream and how that would look on the landscape, we, wet versus paper water. So is your water right just a piece of paper, but there's not actually water that we would protect for because it's so junior. A 1999 water right, at least east of the Cascades, is generally going to be paper. We also have to think about how we are going to regulate for that water when it's in stream and how protectable is it. So we have to, like I mentioned, we have to be able to kind of hold that character of water as it moves downstream. So if you think about a water right being put in stream in a small tributary, we can account for that. It's maybe 10% of the flow, and then it hits the John Day and it's a 0.1% of the flow. We can't differentiate that type, so we may tell the applicant we can only protect it to the mouth, but we can't afford it protection past that. And the last thing I'll say quickly is we are always discussing what people perceive the impact of these transactions to be versus what, we try to explain this criteria and how we think about and ensure that injury isn't happening. But there are, often people are concerned that, if you put water in stream, somehow that's going to deprive me of the water that I would be taking. And, we have a process to ensure that doesn't happen. There's also, it could look different. So if your POD, your point of diversion, is dry, and then in-stream transaction occurs above you, and all of a sudden there's water flowing by your POD, and then we come and tell you, you actually can't take that water, that's not your water. There's always, some education outreach just around what this program does and kind of what it means for folks who exist around where these transactions happen. And I'm sorry, I went through that very quickly. Looking forward to the Q&A session. There's a lot of nuance there that, like I said, any of us could probably fill our whole time allotment this morning, but really appreciate the time this morning. Looking forward to continuing the conversation here in a bit.
Thank you so much, Jess and Chris, and we'll invite Femke and Kate up.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Femke Freiberg. I'm the Western Water Program Director for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or NIFWF, as we call ourselves. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are a nationwide conservation grant maker. So we are also in the business of funding conservation work, like water transactions and acquisitions. We were established by an act of Congress, 1984, and we support efforts all the way from narwhal conservation in the Arctic to coral reef protection. And I will say that stream flow restoration in the Columbia Basin is often pointed to as one of our most successful, measurable, tangible forms of conservation across the country. So I'm very proud to represent this program today. I work on our Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program. This was established by a partnership with Bonneville Power Administration and tribes and the Northwest Power and Conservation Council in 2002. So it's over 2 decades old partnership. And the goal of the program is to maximize voluntary habitat restoration in flow-limited streams. So very far from where we are here today in Astoria at the mouth of the river, we're working in the dry streams that are very critical to survival of native fish. We focus on anadromy, but we actually work across the entire basin, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Western Montana as well. And our program has kind of a 3-pronged approach, and I think some of the tenets of this have been brought up by the previous speakers, but the first component of the program is really about building capacity, and that means supporting groups like Jess and TU and Kate and the Deschutes River Conservancy, who you're about to hear from, to really work on the ground and build trust and build relationships with water users throughout the basin. So that's really the number one component of the program. Second is then, of course, to acquire the water and to conduct the transaction. And then third is to account for the outcome. So monitoring is a really important part of water transactions. It's part of how we determine that we are making a difference. It's also how we determine the money is being spent in a responsible manner and making good impact on the ground. So those are kind of 3 key parts of the program. Next slide. So we have 2 different pots of funding for our program, and both are, we kind of view as co-equal. There's programmatic funding, which is for transaction development, and so this is the kind of the capacity pot. And this goes to support all the staff time, travel, everything that goes into actually getting to a deal. And this, like I said, it's critical. We couldn't have transactions without having the people who actually develop these deals. And this is an annual grant-making program that we run. And then once you are supported by a programmatic capacity grant under our program, you are able to access our transaction funding, and this funding goes to actually pay for the cost of water. And it's kind of a separate pot of funding. Next slide. So I just wanted to highlight that these transactions don't happen in a day and they take time. However, we're able to chart very steady progress and growth over the years. And I like that this kind of upward chart mimics what Chris was showing with the transfer applications. And it really just shows how water transactions have been this kind of, have shown steady growth over the years as a really impactful tool for conservation across the entire basin. So you can kind of see we started supporting deals in 2004, and the darker part of the bar is permanent deals, and then the lighter is temporary. So it really is a mix. We see that temporary deals often are the stepping stone to a permanent transaction, is kind of what Jess highlighted. And so we view them as a very important part of the program along with permanent. And, since 2002, 725 water transactions, almost 3 million acre feet. So this is significant water. I think we calculate that's about the annual domestic use of something like 33 million Americans. So it's no small bucket of water. And these transactions are happening all over the basin and also in areas that are much more arid. So water is, again, it's not easy to come by, and it takes very dedicated effort to secure. And final slide. And then I just wanted to highlight, because we manage, most of the funding is public funding, we really take the reasonableness of the cost seriously. And we have to make sure that every dollar that we pay is kind of justified. And so we have developed a pretty extensive valuation policy for our program. And there's kind of two prongs to it. One is if a transaction cost is more than $500,000, we require a full valuation. We work with expert consultants in economics and water rights, and they'll actually assess, kind of do essentially like an appraisal of the market value of that water right. To determine that, they'll look at things like the volume, reliability, if it's consumptive or non-consumptive, the season, and then they'll also look at market conditions. So what other use would that water be put toward? What's the value of that? What's the demand in that particular region or sub-basin? And so kind of like what's the going rate for water? And come up with a cost. And so that helps us determine that we're paying a fair price. That's a pretty extensive process. And so we also have an approach where if this transaction is less than $500,000, we switch to a more of a basin profile. And this is something where we come up with kind of across a sub-basin, we collect market and price information. So that will look at kind of the market in that particular basin, land price assessment for both purchase and rental, look at crop budget analysis, so what's being grown and what's the market value of those crops, and come up with a set of ranges for both acquisition values as well as lease values, and that's kind of more the temporary transaction type. And those ranges can be used to determine what is a fair price, and also can support our groups that are working on the ground to do their negotiations with landowners. So it kind of gives them some good information when they go into their negotiations. So I just wanted to highlight this because, ultimately we're paying market price for water, and every dollar that we spend has to be kind of justified and validated by clear market and price data.
Okay. Good morning, Chairs Coates and McClary, and members of the board, and Director O'Brien. My name is Kate Fitzpatrick. I'm the Executive Director of the Deschutes River Conservancy. We were formed in 1996 by the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs alongside irrigation and environmental interests to restore stream flow and water quality in the Deschutes Basin. I'm happy to be here with my esteemed panelists. We've been having a lot of fun all through grade school working on this stuff. It's really the best people and the best work. My task in closing out the information session is just to put a little highlight on specifically irrigation modernization projects, or you've heard it referred to as using the Conserve Water Statute, irrigation efficiency projects. That's a newer tool in the OWEB acquisition grant portfolio, and it's a little bit different and it's really important. So I just wanted to highlight some ways it's different and how we've used it in the Deschutes as an example of how effective it can be as part of the broader portfolio. It's a little bit different because in this case, we're not taking water off of agricultural lands. So when you hear about in-stream leases or in-stream transfers, you're generally following or permanently taking water off of acres. Split season lease is a little bit different, but irrigation modernization, you're actually just increasing efficiency to reduce demand on the water system and protecting that water permanently in stream. So it's a long-term investment that results in permanent protection of in-stream flows when done well. And it also creates multiple benefits far beyond the river. So it's really, when you look at the tools, it's truly a win-win if you're looking to support agriculture, communities, and rivers. So I'll show you an example in the Deschutes of what those multiple benefits look like to make it a little more real. My last point I wanted to make today is the cost structure is a little bit different. It's doesn't fall neatly into the category that FEMCA talked about as market-based assessment. It's really the cost of the project. And there are some cases where if you want to see water in stream, this might be the only option when you're working voluntarily with landowners. And the cost of the pipe is frankly the cost of the pipe. I will say that there's great opportunities we've found to leverage federal and other funding to cost share in those outcomes. And sometimes those agencies are buying outcomes beyond water and stream. And so, you can look at it as a way to really, with
sometimes smaller amounts of state money really leverage bigger federal funds to get those multiple benefits. Next, let me just start, sorry, go back. We've invoked Waichus Creek and the flat fire a lot today, but that's actually one of the examples I'm using. So if you look on the left of that slide, that's Waichus Creek pre-in-stream flow restoration work, and it used to run dry 2 out of every 3 summers through the city of Sisters. This is where Waichus Creek runs through. And so I'm just going to show you how we've used irrigation modernization to get it looking a little more like the picture on the right. So next. Yeah, so in the case of Waichus Creek, there's one irrigation district on the creek, Three Sisters Irrigation District. We've been working with them closely for over 20 years, and they are at the point where they've piped 65 out of their 66 miles of district canals. And they've also worked with NRCS to come along and do on-farm efficiency work, like flood to sprinkler alongside that pipe. So the results are really broad. We've restored 33 cubic feet per second in stream just from conserved water projects, and that's across 22 projects. Irrigation patrons receive more reliable water deliveries. So in the recent drought years, they actually were irrigating through the whole season. It makes it much easier for the district to operate. People can turn on and off and really only use as much water as they need. You don't have to treat the canals for weeds and whatnot. They've actually installed 3 in-conduit hydropower plants on the system. And so that's just taking advantage of the pressure already moving through piped deliveries. And so they're generating power to power about 300 homes in the area. And then a lot of the patrons were able to take out their pumps because they now receive pressurized water. So they're receiving energy cost savings and contributing to renewable energy goals. In addition, the reliability of the irrigation water has really increased the contribution to the farm economy of the water being used. And they're able to feel secure about the crops that they're growing and the equipment that they're buying. So you're really seeing benefits that extend far beyond the creek. But for us, the creek was the main driver. Next slide, please. You don't need to get caught in the details of too much information on this slide. I just wanted to tell you that, we approach, like Jess was talking about, each reach with a specific strategy based on the landowners and the opportunities and the context. And so piping for us is one tool of a broader portfolio. And you can see in this case on that bar chart, the blue is the conserved water projects from piping. And the yellow are permanent in-stream transfers, and the orange is in-stream leasing. So it's really when you put all those tools together that you see the most benefit. And I will say also that in many cases, in our basin where we have really leaky canal systems, the more that you pipe a system, the more flexibility the irrigation district in our case has to lease more water in stream because they can assure delivery to the end user. So there's a really good synergy with market-based and infrastructure projects. And I'll just point out that Chris mentioned in-stream water rates, and I just want to point out that 33 CFS is an ODFW held in-stream water rate related to that 1987 Act. A critical point, I think, is those in-stream water rates carry the priority date of when it was applied for. So 1987 or later, which in an over-appropriated system isn't going to get you any water in stream. So that's why the transactions are so important, because when we do these 3 tools that you see on the screen, you're able to retain the senior priority date of the original water rate. And so we're using that in-stream water rate as a goal, and then we're sort of backfilling it with the senior water rates transactions. Next slide, please. And this is just to drive home, generally, we've heard a lot about the restoration on the land trust preserves in partnership with the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council. This is fresh after a stage 0 process-based restoration project in the creek. And so I'm just pointing out, first of all, you couldn't do this project without flow in the creek in the summer. So that was kind of the first ingredient. And then they've been able to come in and conserve enough land to do this sort of valley-based floodplain restoration. And create incredible habitat for fish. So it's really, flow is part of a larger conservation strategy in these reaches that really bring in all the partners on the habitat and land conservation side. Next slide, please. Perfect. This is just another example, and Jess already mentioned the Middle Deschutes, where we see piping, which is the light blue middle part of the bar, as part of a larger portfolio, which includes in-stream transfers and leasing. And we can go to the last slide. just touching on one of our priority reaches right now is the upper Deschutes River below Bend. Natasha mentioned the Oregon spotted frog that needs a lot more water in the winter. And so the irrigation districts in our basin are really focused on aggressive large-scale canal piping that will actually create about between 100 and 200 cubic feet per second of restored flow in that reach. So that's a lot of piping. And I do want to say two things. One, it's really expensive, but the benefits are huge, and it will, allow the districts to continue to operate in the context of a threatened species under the ESA. The second thing I will say back to the leaky canals is that when we can plumb that system, there is so much opportunity in the Bend-Redmond area for the market-based transactions to come into play at a scale far beyond what we're seeing now. And so again, when we can marry those tools, the investment in conservation and irrigation efficiency really escalates in spades. So again, this tool is a long-term investment that results in permanent water. It's usually part of a broader portfolio. It has multiple benefits, and it creates more flexibility in the irrigation delivery system. So looking forward to zooming back out to the full panel and having some Q&A.
Great, thank you to all of our panelists. We have 30 minutes for Q&A, which is wonderful. So we'll invite the other four folks to come up. Brian and I will move to the front row. If you need us, we're happy to pop up. But
Thank you.
yes.
While you do that, I will just say thank you so much for such a great presentation in a lot of detail. It was extremely thorough for a highly complex topic. And we really appreciate all of the panelists traveling to be here in person to share this information and participate in the Q&A and discussion. So we'll move into that. Like Renee mentioned, we have just under 30 minutes. And I know this topic will spark a lot of question and discussion. So opening that up, anybody have questions?
Me, Renee.
Can we play some music?
I'll remember that.
Okay, we'll go Mark Webb first and then Woody.
So a couple questions. Again, that was fantastic. Thank you. Maybe the first question is for Kate. When you're doing the piping, who's responsible for the maintenance costs thereafter and replacing it in 50 years or whatever? Just curious.
The irrigation districts in our case. And
So no additional cost to the...
in other cases, I would imagine it would be the landowner.
Okay. And then this will be sort of awkward, but I just want to clear something up. The irrigators that I know, and this goes to the trust issue, in the irrigation efficiency context, their understanding is that they have to give up a small portion of their water right in order to get the efficiency project done. Is that correct? Part of the reason they say that is ODF&W is pressuring OWRD as a sort of trick to get more stream in water. So we'll give you a more efficient system, but it's going to actually cost you part of your water right. I don't know if that's accurate, but it would be nice to hear from the agency, particularly OWRD, if that is a part of it, and if so, why? I mean, I can understand where if it's a more efficient system, you don't need as much water. But again, this goes to the trust issues in places where there's just a lot of distrust of state and federal agencies, and it kind of compromises the ability to achieve your other goals. So I'd like to hear on that.
Yeah, I'm happy. Well, that was loud. It was too close. It's a great question. I assure you, Spencer's very nice to me. But there is a requirement in statute that it's called the Allocation of Conserved Water Program. Participating in that program does require that a portion of the right that is being conserved through the irrigation efficiency project does go in stream as part of this. It's really, might hear like water spreading. It's kind of a bad word that we don't like to say out loud in the state of Oregon, where you don't get to take your water right and keep the same quantity of water that you're allowed under the right and then expand the number of acres that you irrigate with that right. Generally, water spreading. The Allocation of Conserved Water Program allows an irrigator that maybe has 100 acres with a 10, I'm just going to totally make this up, 10 CFS water right, and they can get by with 5 by piping. 25, a minimum of 25% of the conserved water goes back into stream and into the stream with the priority date of the right, and that's held in trust by our department. 75% of the conserved water, the irrigator can pick up and put down wherever they want. It doesn't have to go in the original footprint. So yes, the irrigator or the water right holder does have to give up a portion of the right, but they're also allowed to take the remainder of the conserved water and irrigate new lands.
And their
potentially.
footprint, okay.
And the 25% is the floor. That's a mandatory piece in statute. If you get 100% of public dollars to do your efficiency work, then 100% of the conserved water goes in stream. If it's 50% public, 50% private, 50% of the conserved water goes in stream, and that's all laid out in rule and statute. So it's all very accessible if you want to read, or people who are concerned want to read. Happy to provide the citations. I don't remember them off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. A lot of people don't understand it that way. I appreciate it. It makes a lot of sense to me. And then maybe the last question right now. So we talk about limiting factors within the ecology, within the ecosystem, within the stream. And I'm just wondering what can OWEB do to just make it as easy as possible for y'all to do this quickly? Because I assume there's a certain urgency to hitting the 80% threshold. And it would just be nice for me personally, even if we can't quite do it all quickly, to know what things we need to tick off. So, if there's a list we could just tick off.
Read them. Do you want to start, Anton?
Sure, thank you. And this might be beyond the purview of this discussion today specifically, but one of the challenges, and I think we talked about this a little bit in Pendleton, was we need the infrastructure, the capacity to do these transactions. As Jess mentioned, many of them take, years, decades to implement. And so if we don't have the support for the personnel out there who have the expertise and knowledge to implement these, it's really difficult to get them done. So I know, we might not be talking about a capacity program exactly, but it's a huge need, and one that the Columbia Basin Water Transaction Program has really stepped in to fill, and that's been immensely helpful. Unfortunately, they're oversubscribed, so we have more need than we do that capacity support right now. So that's one thing that definitely weighs on my mind, is as to how we do this better going forward.
Yeah, I would underline that, and, obviously, I think we're gonna need more money. We'll probably hear this throughout all the restoration and acquisition programs, so that's just an ongoing reality. One of the things the Deschutes River Conservancy is trying to do is innovate on tools, and some of our projects are more programmatic because we've been doing them for a long time. So for example, in-stream leasing, we lease a certain amount of acres over and over, and the landowners might change, but the amount in stream stays the same. And so those don't always fit the application boxes as well as they could. And I think some of this we could iron out and work with the amazing OWEB staff in the RAC to make those processes work for more temporary programmatic or other innovative processes. Jess, you want to go next?
I guess I would just reiterate the capacity piece, and like Femke talked about, the Columbia Basin program does have a programmatic piece, but that only covers the Columbia Basin, and so the other areas of the state do have a big need for the capacity funding to get involved in this work and stay in it through till we can achieve the goals we want. Because there are other critical basins in Oregon besides what falls in the Columbia Basin.
Can I add one more thing? Just one other piece on the funding. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate, and we're doing this already. And NIFWIF's fortunate enough to be on the review panel for the OWEB Water Acquisition Program. And I see Brian Staub on the line, and we've been working with the U.S. Forest Service on coordinating Forest Service funding with our BPA funding. We've coordinated NRCS funding, and I think as much as the funding entities can collaborate and coordinate efforts, then that we've seen can really accelerate. So we say, okay, this is a really critical area. We're falling short on our target, fish are suffering. Can we all kind of be more efficient in our review and then deliver funding in a way that really meets the need and gets the projects done? So.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna go to Woody, Kelly, Mark Labhart, Dan.
Okay, a quick comment on Mark's question. So personally, when I did conserved water, I saved 40%. And so if the state had not reallocated that in stream, of which I took some of back out, then that would have transitioned from a wet water right, that 40%, to then it would have become a paper water right, because relative to using the infrastructure, I lost the ability to apply it. So.
I appreciated it.
That was just I don't know if that.
Some of the communities I work with, they just look at what they lost, not what they gained, and it was nice to hear that explained.
So actually,
that way.
I actually expanded 60 acres of dry land into irrigated ground with some of that conserved water. Then, so my question was probably mostly for Chris. Is there a legal avenue? There's a split season leasing, and it just seems relative to the metric that Spencer gave of 80% of the water in stream, and that early season flows are going to suggest that agricultural use is not infringing on that 80% near as much when the water is abundant as in the late season. So is there a tool or a thought of creating a tool for split season acquisitions, permanent alteration of water right certificate relative to the allocation timing?
That's a really great question, Woody. I'm not sure, the split season leasing program was a pilot that was just made permanent. It's that 23 session. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of those conversations. Not that I would necessarily be aware of all the legislative concepts that are being thrown around. I'm not aware that the department is thinking about that. There may be a concept that is brought forward by one of the partners here, someone else working in the space. We have some. I think that's an idea that we would certainly, I think, could be workable within the split season leasing framework. I'm not sure, fundamentally how the acquisition piece would work.
Seems like it could maximize beneficial use to all meanings moving forward.
I've been thinking about it. No, thank you very much for the question. I think it's maybe the best example of a tool that we could use desperately to allow us to continue to work collaboratively on these solutions. I can allow a county, for instance, if you use that late season water, your ag returns probably aren't as good as when you're applying it early on. Meanwhile, we have a market-based system for in-stream flow restoration. So we have entities here who'd be happy to compensate ag producers for that late season water. We just don't have the tool to do that yet. The split season leasing is a great temporary option, but it still doesn't fix the problem. So I would very much love to work with folks in Salem to get something like that. That'd be wonderful.
Thank you. I see your hand is up, Brian, so you're on the list. We'll go to Kelly next and then Mark Labhart.
Thanks. So I just want to say.
I don't know. Excuse me.
Sorry,
I'm
having trouble with the connection.
Goodbye.
So I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists again. This information was fantastic and really, really in depth. I was wondering if we could walk through, so there are multiple steps to this process. Starting with the very first step of trust building, right? And getting to know a landowner all the way through everything, the market valuation, all the way up through actually submitting the OWEB application to the OWEB review team, all of it. And to me, it sounds like everything is very thoroughly vetted and very carefully planned out from step one all the way through by the time it gets to the OWEB board for a decision. And so my question really is, can you talk to us about the point where you are applying for the application and the kind of review that happens? So you've walked us through what you do to prepare the application with the market valuation and all of the review up to that point. And then once it's submitted to OWEB, maybe this is more a question for Renee, but what happens once it gets to OWEB? Who is on the review panel and what does that review look like?
Just gonna pop in, I'm not gonna take your chair again. So I think if Brian could come up and talk a little bit about the review process, and then maybe we could invite Spencer and Anton and Femke to share perspectives, since they all help with the review.
For the record, Brian Walcott, Water Acquisition Grant Coordinator. The review process occurs once applications come in. There's a quick eligibility and completion check, and then the application materials are sent to our reviewers. We have approximately 10 reviewers comprised of state, federal, and tribal agency staff that have experience with either doing transaction work in the past or part of the review of transactions. And we also have a private contractor, NIFWIF, also working with West Water Research to do the valuation and review of the application as well. The review team reviews materials, works through a worksheet that's based on the 15 criteria that are in rule for the program. And then the review team there's typically virtual site visits, which is an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the project, maybe see some additional maps, aerial photos of the project. And then there is a review team meeting that takes place where the review team makes a decision as to whether to fund, not fund, or fund with conditions. And then that's brought before you all.
Thank you so much for that explanation. What I'm really trying to get at here is that from like project inception and thought all the way through the point that it gets to the board, there are multiple points where there is a lot of review and scrutiny from not only the applicants and what they're providing, but also through the review process with the OWEB review team that is comprised of experts in the field. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that by the time it gets to the board, it's been pretty thoroughly vetted by the experts in water transactions within the state of Oregon that have been doing this since they were 5 years old, right? So I think that's really important for us to know and to understand. And having been a grant recipient of an OWEB in-stream lease grant and having worked with Trout Unlimited on it, I can tell you that the same process, we went through the same process, and it really, really started with what are your needs as an organization? How can we work with you? How can we make this a project that you would want to tell your neighbors about? That you would want to, a positive experience, really. And it was, I have to say, overall, it was a really positive experience for us. And it was kind of a foot in the door, learning about this process and how it works. And it was very positive. And I would say from that, we've started talking about some additional things that we can potentially do. Even just the irrigation modernization work on your lands is huge, right, to keep water in stream. So I'm really glad that you all touched on that today as well. A piece that sometimes people don't think about because they think about the in-stream leasing portion of things or the in-stream water right transfer portion of things, but you don't think about if you just update your infrastructure, what that can do for the water delivery in your system and how that can help you as a producer, but also help the stream, help the fish. So just really, really appreciate, I could talk with you guys for hours about this. So just appreciate you taking the time today and talking with us about this. Thank you.
As a review team member, maybe it'd be helpful just to share my mindset when I go into these things. I think really I look for three things when I'm looking at a transaction. The first is the water right valid? Because once we submit the application to Oregon Water Resources Department, we don't want to set up the water right holder for any bad experiences of having OWD say, hey, you haven't used this, we're going to take your water right. We got to make sure that we build trust with that landowner, and having them lose their water rights is not good for repeat business. That's the first thing that crosses my mind, making sure that we do that analysis. The second thing is, what are we paying them? And is that what the market bears? We don't want to inflate the market. We obviously don't want to undercompensate them either, but if we inflate market expectations, that's not good stewarding of public resources that could be going elsewhere. So that economic component is really important. I think the last thing then is this water where we need it ecologically, and does this transaction help us to get to a permanent transaction in the future, and looking at that strategic component. Because that's, I don't think any of us are in business to be doing this forever and ever in-stream leasing. I'd love to be put out of work, and the way that we do that is permanently addressing our stream flow restoration problem. So I think that's the mindset I take into it, and certainly encourage the other review team members to share.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. In addition to what Anton mentioned, I also look at the reliability and the past use of the water to ensure it was actually being applied historically, and that we're not just paying for paper water. That's a big one. And then also reviewing the monitoring plan. How are we going to ensure this water is actually protected in stream and is protected to benefit the resource?
Thank you so much for that very thorough answer on the review team. Mark Labhart, Dan, and then Brian.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. So I really appreciate your question. That helped me understand the review process a little bit better. So I try to really understand things, and I'm just glad we have certified smart people that I can go to, because the whole water picture is very complicated, very political. And so I just try to wrap my arms around it, and I'm still having trouble. So, but my first question is for you, Kate. I live in Sisters. I don't know if you knew that or not. Okay, so I get to see the piping project's success, and it's just amazing. But my worry is a lot of those piping projects were funded by a variety of sources, federal funding included. Are you worried? Is there a worry that we're going to potentially lose that source? Because for the bang for the buck, in terms of putting water back into the stream, piping projects have really shined. And now I'm worried that they may not shine anymore because there's not enough money to do them. Are you as worried as I am or not?
Thanks, Mark. Well, that's a great question and concern. Yes, we're worried by some act of some higher power. The federal money is still flowing to these projects specifically. For example, we received a $25 million Regional Conservation Partnership Program NRCS grant, and it got frozen for about 8 months. It looks like it's flowing again. I don't know the mysterious process, but it's helping, rural conservative farmers, and so it's continuing to make its way through. That's not always the case right now, and so I have no crystal ball to predict that, but so far this year, we're doing okay. I think one of our irrigation districts has a total of $80 million coming in, but the future of federal spending is very much in question. So we're always going to have to try to keep as diverse a portfolio as we can. We tapped into BPA for this, tapping into the state, but the scale of investment is pretty big. So we'll just have to keep doing what we can do. Yeah, and those of you who want to talk to Congress, go for it.
Thank you. Another worry question. Every legislative session, I see all these water right bills, or water right. Everybody's trying to do something good with them. Are we actually helping, or? Because I see that, well, they fixed this, but that caused a problem over here. And then, Mark Owens is he and Rep. Helms are trying to do all this really good work to try to figure out how do we deal with water, and then I sit back and somebody says, well, we fixed that, but this is still a problem, and so, you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Water Resource?
Wow. I would say it's probably a matter of perspective.
Okay.
I think Representative Hellman Owens and the Water Caucus generally are looking for ways to make water or managing water in the state better. That's been, I think, just generally speaking. Now, there are certainly some bills that the department reviews and provides input on that we think are, very achievable. I think of the Deschutes water banking conversation that happened this year. We also had a pilot project that we developed at Anton and Walla Walla River Irrigation District. Talked to Senator Nash and we got that over the finish line. So I think there are, when we can bring in a diverse coalition of people who are all supportive of a thing, and we can go to those two gentlemen and pitch an idea, or to your local legislator, I think we still have opportunities to do good things legislatively. I personally, we have some concern, just like we get a lot of questions around, well, we want water management to be more flexible. And I think what does more flexible management mean? It really depends on what you're trying to achieve, and that can be tricky. Certainly for the department, we're mostly in a provide feedback, technical support to the legislature. We don't run very many of our own bills. Most of our bills are budget or split season leasing bill. So we aren't driving. The governor's office will kind of take a portfolio of bills that they want to move forward, that we obviously have more of a hand in helping craft than bills that legislators bring forward. But we really, rely on our partners here to help us provide feedback on things that they think are good or not. And like I said, it really is a matter of your viewscape of the world or the organization you're representing, probably, if you think those bills are good, bad, or otherwise.
Do I have time for one more quick question?
Very brief.
Well, this is a question for Spencer. I think Spencer can answer it. The department applies for in-stream water rights, and the question comes up, well, why are you doing that? You don't have any seniority with them, and there's all these water rights that are out there. Could you address that because I hear that quite a bit. Well, why are they doing that? You're not going to get anything out of it because you're so far down the history.
Sure thing. That is true. Certain parts of the state are overallocated. We're talking about water rights from the mid-1800s. However, even in those locations, there are these shoulder seasons which still have water available. And currently, with climate change in mind, there's extension of irrigation season. There's more interest in getting water in October, November, and early in the spring. So our state agency in-stream water rights are protecting that water. And then on the west side of the state, there is still water available during the irrigation season in some locations. So it is meaningful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to add 5 more minutes to this agenda item to get through all of the board comments, which means we're shooting for 10:10. The order is going to go Dan, Brian, Russ. And if folks have additional questions after that, I would encourage offline conversation or continuing the conversation in the ARE committee. So Dan, please.
All right, thanks. I got one kind of quick but not easy question, and I'm not looking for a precise answer, but just ballpark is like the conservation water through the piping in conservation stuff. Is it like 2x, 5x, or 10x more than just a straight water acquisition? Just kind of curious about that. But my real question is about the priorities. Spencer, you talked about a pretty high lift to prevent impacts to streams. And it looked like in most of those most of the waters in the table you presented were very, very far from the goal. And then we heard from Jessica about Trout Unlimited's priority. So I'm really kind of curious, is the priority to fix a single system? Like Jessica had very specific systems, or do we want to put a little bit of water in every stream? What's the uplift? And I'm curious about that for 2 reasons. One is we're talking about ecological priorities through our FIPS later today, and I don't know if any of this would inform that. But more importantly, there is big demand, and OWEB board has a very hard time making decisions sometimes about like telling people that, no, basically. And I'm wondering if there's a priority scheme that we should be looking at when we know we can't fund everything. How could we help? What could you offer to help us decide, like, all else being equal, like, what are the priorities? And it's probably a very complicated question, but I think that's something that this board can.
I'll make the first pass at that. Yeah, it's a very good question. I appreciate it. No, I think we have to be strategic and prioritize locations and focus on these individual basins. It would be great if we could achieve that 80% threshold across the state while also keeping agricultural production where it needs to be. But we don't have the resources to do that, nor is it realistic. So we really, really, in my opinion, have to focus on these specific basins and double down there. Lostine, the Deschutes, White Chutes. We can't do this shotgun approach and be effective across the state. It really has to be strategic. And my thought is our upcoming flood restoration prioritization will help us pinpoint specific subwatersheds where we think they're most impactful for flow restoration and resilient.
I can try to take a short crack at your other question on pricing. It depends on where you are. So I would say in White Chutes Creek, they're not that different. But I will say in the Deschutes, if people were able to sell water, piping is probably somewhere between 2 to 5 times more expensive, but there are no permanent water acquisitions available because of irrigation district policies right now and the lack of cultural will to dry up farmland. And also the operational issues I talked about with the leaky canals. So I think if we can invest in the Deschutes side of the system with that pipe, that will open up those more cost-effective permanent transactions where the districts will be more willing to let that water leave the system.
Thank you. We're going to move to Brian, please.
Appreciate that. I want to thank the panel. A really extraordinary kind of set of presentations, and really illustrates your skills and experience, and really, most importantly, the deliverables that have been provided by the work that you guys have done for decades now. You also did a good job of talking about the rather significant challenges we face and the need for a long game strategy. So Spencer and others, really glad to see that strategy kind of continuing to move forward. We talked about that over the years, and it's great to see that maturing and being ready for operations soon. It's regarding that long game strategy, I think one of the things we heard clearly was the need for capacity, building and maintaining that kind of, so that to actually develop the transactions. So question for Femke, I think I saw on your graph, that if we look at the acquisitions, the permanent acquisitions, kind of the growth rate, the slope of that line is a little lower than the amount of, when you look at the temporary leases. So I guess my question is that correct that we're needing to do more temporary leases as a ratio of the permanent acquisitions over time, and that's kind of an intrinsic property as we have a mature program, that you just have to do more of those short-term leases, which require a bit more capacity to get to our ultimate goal on a permanent transaction. Is that correct? And would you suggest that that's a likely thing that we'll see play out in most places beyond just the Columbia, which I think your data was pertaining to?
Yeah, I think because the program's been going for so long, I think some of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. Yeah. And as Kate said, there's areas where there just aren't the opportunity for buying and doing major deals. That said, we are still seeing massive permanent projects coming through, but they're a little bit, it'll take maybe 5 years to develop, and then it will be that the darker blue line will make a big shot up, and then we'll kind of go along and we'll fill that in with more temporary transactions, and there'll be another big leap. So it's a little bit, I think both those things are true, that the temporary are helping to meet the annual flow targets, and especially dry years, and some of the low-hanging fruit is already been picked of the permanent deals. That said, I think there is still opportunity for permanent acquisitions, but it does take that year in, I mean, really like week by week investment in trust and relationship building in these basins to get to a permanent deal.
Thank you. Russ,
Appreciate
please.
that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I must say that Oregon is really so fortunate to have your commitment and expertise in this really critical area. I think about, following on what Brian was saying, this is a very staff-intensive commitment to be able to get the results that you want, both in conservation as well as the staffing to police the process over time. And I guess, Femke, when you look at the growth of the program, you have both pragmatic and transactional. And which is the harder one from your perspective to be able to get the resources to sustain the program over time?
Definitely the programmatic and capacity, because, you know, there are other funders who will come to the table for a good water deal. OWEB is one of them. And there's other funding partners in the other basin states as well who will come and kind of co-fund a major transaction or even a large infrastructure project. You can usually attract other funding partners, but sometimes that will be at the end of like 10 years of staff effort to get to that big shiny project and impact. So I think the kind of capacity programmatic funding, it's been harder for NIFWIF, and one of our roles is to try to bring in more funding partners to the table for this work, and that's one of the harder components of the project, to bring in other funders. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are over time. I know that this topic is very important and complex, so we are going to squeeze in a comment from Liza Jane. We'll go to Jamie, and then we really do have to end. Apologies for going a bit over time, but Liza Jane and then Jamie, please.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's just because this is my last chance, so I took up a minute. And call me old-fashioned or call me an early adopter, whatever you want to call me, but this is for the board. Let's not lose sight of the value of acquiring water by cutting down juniper, by planting trees so it doesn't evaporate. There's things we can keep doing and keep doing and keep doing, and it'll make a difference. I appreciate all the work you do. We're all after the same thing. So there's just lots of ways to do it. So stay open to some of those ways, because I've experienced great success with some of those small things that we can do. That's it.
Thank you, Liza Jane. Jamie, please.
Thank you. And phenomenal presentation. My apologies, I had to be off screen because of internet instability, but really appreciated the information, and especially the focus on or discussion about paper water. My question is actually prior to the application process. The first speaker talked about the needs across the state, and so that's really the focus of my question. When applications come before us, we always hear, as a board, we can only respond to the applications that come before us. So the question is there any way that we can prompt more applications from those areas that are higher needs? We can essentially get the best bang for our buck.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Jamie. I do think certainly as part of the application process, we ask folks, and Jess mentioned it, things like what is outlined in NOAA biological opinions, what's identified in recovery plans. I think with the availability of the ODFW priorities, that absolutely will become a critical part of the application process, just prompting folks upfront. Please make those connections that you're describing. Why this project? Why here? Why now? How does it mesh with areas that are of great importance, given that we do not have resources to address all of these issues? So I believe we can still be very responsive grant maker, but point folks to emerging information that is very informative in terms of helping the board make the most strategic investments you can with limited resources for water acquisitions.
Thanks. And I know there's not time for a follow-up question, but so I'll just ask in future committee meetings, be interested in hearing more about some of the overlap with water law and our sovereign tribal nations. I know some tribes have water agreements in terms of amounts. I don't believe all do, so would just be interested in getting more information on that in the future. But thanks so much for the great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So with that, we are going to move into a break. Let's be back. It's 10:14. Let's be back at 10:25. 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're gonna get started again. Grab your coffee, grab your snack. I don't want anybody hangry for the second half.
Oh, now she's here. I'm here now. Did I take your spot? I did. No, I did.
Joining us, Tiffany. Great, okay. Thanks, welcome. Okay, thanks, everyone. We are going to go into agenda item J, committee updates. So with this, we will, I'll call on our committee co-chairs to give a brief update on the committee meetings that we have had. And first up is the Partnerships and Capacity Committee update. And we've got Lindsay and Woody. I'm looking at Woody here. Okay, you're gonna give them. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we looked at the CREP technical assistance at the committee meeting, and I won't go into that because we hashed through it pretty in-depth yesterday in the meeting. And then we're in the 5-year cycle of updating the FIP ecological priorities. And relative to the meeting, I think right after these committee presentations, we go into that. And there was some map updates and some terminology updates and a few changes to scope. And the committee had not much comment to change what the department had presented. So the meeting will play itself out here in the next agenda item K. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Woody. Next up is the Acquisitions, Restoration, and Emerging Topics Committee update, and I will kick it over to Russ for that.
Sure. We have a lot going on in our committee, so I chose to write it out here for the record, and I'll read through it just to save time. I refer the full board to, and the public for that matter, to page 47 of the ebook for an excellent summary of our meeting on September 4th. We also had a follow-up meeting on October 23rd to help us really take stock and effectively process all the inputs that we're getting from both partners and the public. I want to recognize our co-chair, Dan Brown, who couldn't be with us, and thank you for being on the screen there. Kelly, also thank you for your input. Mark Webb, thank you. And Bruce, thank you. Your sage advice is going to be missed on the committee. I hope we could get you as a volunteer to continue in your service and get us through the end point here. Thank you. I also want to say that we continue to be really admirably supported by Renee, Sarah, where's Sarah? But anyways, thank you, Sarah. And Miriam, as well as DOJ counsel, has been with us throughout this process. As we reported at the last meeting, Colt continues to give us excellent counsel, and it's very clear they're a vital player as we tackle the modernization process. And I want to thank Joe publicly here, as well as Carson Kendrick, for your leadership and your support and commitment to the program. As Joe had indicated in September, we got generous feedback, really top-notch professional feedback from a unique panel. Melissa Calvestrand, the ED of the Land Trust Alliance Accreditation Commission, gave us a really solid grounding. And our colleague, Marty Martino from the Blue Mountain Land Trust, who we've all seen in Pendleton last, really gave excellent context, as well as Claire Fox, the Conservation Director for the Greenbelt Land Trust, and Nate Ulrich from the Columbia Land Trust, all gave us really good counsel. They presented, I guess, really good historical information, guidance to the committee on what is working and what isn't working. And I really urge everybody to take the time and really listen carefully to the comments on OWEB's YouTube channel. It's going to provide a really solid grounding of what has evolved over the last 27 years of OWEB's existence and really what it's going to take to get to a modernization process. In December, the ARE committee will continue the journey, and we will focus on significant habitat and future habitat conditions and those requirements, and how to fully engage with our First Nation partners and fully meet their needs in this modernization process. That's all going to occur in the December meeting. And also in a few minutes, you're going to get a really, really good land acquisition modernization update from Renee and Miriam, I guess, will be joining us. That's outlined in the ebook as item L from page 84 to 86. It just adds to the rich context of the dialogue that is going on, but I want to just say thank you to everybody for your extraordinary support in this process. We're making great headway. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, next is the Tracking and Communicating Results Mission and Values Committee update, and that'll be that's a mouthful. Okay.
It is. So to that point, I heard a staff suggestion last night. So we had a Monitoring 101 presentation, similar to what we heard yesterday from Courtney Schaff, Ken Fetcho, Audrey Hatch, and then Linda Repplinger also joined us. And we were so impressed by the presentation that we recommended it be added to the agenda for the board meeting. So that's how it came about. And then we did hear a staff suggestion to rename the committee Tracking and Communicating Outcomes, or TACO. So I'll bring that back to the next meeting to see if that is easier.
Thanks, Jesse. Also, I love that name. I think we should go with that. Okay. Up next, we have agenda item K, our FIP ecological priorities, and we will hear from both of the Erics, Eric W. and the FIP staff.
Thank you, co-chairs, members of the board. Eric Williams, for the record, OWEB's Restoration Grants Manager. We are here for the agenda item to discuss our ecological priorities, and we've been talking about this for the better part of this year. And as Woody mentioned, we've been working with the Partnerships and Capacity Committee to update them throughout the process. And so what we'd like to do today is do a little bit of a recap on the engagement we've done around ecological priorities. You saw some of that at the July board meeting in the Partnerships and Capacity Committee's report to the board. And then we'll move into the recommended revisions to the ecological priorities that we have for the FIP program. And then leading up to next steps on this, and a reminder that in January, we'll be asking the board to adopt the revised ecological priorities, and that will set us up for the next FIP solicitation, which will be our 5th cohort of partnerships to award. And so moving through a brief recap of where we are. As a reminder, the FIP program addresses these board-identified priorities designed to achieve landscape scale ecological outcomes, designed to implement a results-oriented strategic action plan, which includes a theory of change on how you get from the actions funded in the FIP to the ecological outcomes, and importantly, is implemented by a high-performing partnership. When we first launched the FIP program, we did an extensive engagement process to develop the initial set of ecological priorities that happened in 2015. And then we revisited those 5 years later in 2019, 2020, solicited feedback, did some engagement on it, and that did result in some updates to the ecological priorities, not what we would consider to be major changes, but important additions, incorporating things like tribal strategic plans and species recovery plans to expand the eligible areas for native fish habitat. And as a reminder, the rules that you've adopted for the FIP program require looking at these ecological priorities at least every 5 years. And that's the process that we're in right now, given that the last time we updated these was in 2025. As a reminder, these are the 7 current ecological priorities. All of the FIPs that have been funded to date have been within one of these 7 ecological priorities. And here's just a list of the 20 cohorts, partnerships that have been funded in the 4 cohorts of FIP awards over time. And an important note here is that by the 4th cohort there, with the 20 partnerships with active FIPs, we now have FIPs that have been awarded funds in each of those 7 ecological priority areas. And you could see the distribution across the state in this map of all of those partnerships that have been funded up to date. In terms of the engagement that we've done, some of this is a recap from what we talked about in the committee report last time. We had an online survey with almost 100 responses. We did a tribal listening session. We did 4 public listening sessions. We had one-on-one and group discussions, as well as receiving written feedback from folks. And I want to here acknowledge that we had significant help from our colleagues at OSU Extension, at the Oregon Department of Forestry and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, which Mark alluded to in his initial remarks during board report out, to help inform how we take the information that we heard in the listening session, the suggestions we heard in the listening sessions, to meld those into priority updates. And so really want to acknowledge the vital assistance we've gotten from those agencies. In terms of the questions that we asked people, both in the survey and in the listening sessions, it's basically, what would you keep? What would you retire? What would you amend, if anything? What revisions might we look at, might we want to consider in these ecological priorities? And also, are there any that we should combine? So those were basically the questions. And then if folks had ideas on priorities to propose, we had additional questions for them. What habitat types, where are they located? What kind of information should inform that priority? And then, of course, we had some open-ended questions as well. The general feedback that we got, and again, this is a little bit of recap from what you saw in the July committee report, was a consensus generally that the FIP ecological priorities have value, and there weren't suggestions to retire any of them. We did have a few suggestions to retire some, but the overwhelming majority of the feedback suggested that we keep the ones that we have. There was several comments to maybe combine some of the priorities, and we'll talk about that when we get into our proposed revisions in a moment here. Importantly, there were some comments around habitat connectivity, and in particular, making sure that we're prioritizing ways that we can really look at the information that ODFW has produced on habitat connectivity and make that work eligible and maybe include that as sort of a priority lens on FIP actions within some of the ecological priorities. Climate change was mentioned in many comments about the need to make sure we're incorporating climate resilience into our FIP priorities, which I think we have when you look at the work that the FIPs have done over time. A lot of it has been focused on resilience. But wanted to note that here because that's still something that came up quite a bit in our listening session, our engagements, our survey responses. And we did have some comments that we really should look at what we've achieved to date with the FIPs that we have, particularly in the sagebrush, sage steppe habitat FIP, before further investments were made. So taking some of that feedback, we recognize that there are a couple of things that we think we should add to all of the priorities. whichever they may be that we end up adopting. One is that landscape scale disturbance and addressing landscape scale disturbance should be an eligible activity across all FIP ecological priorities. The second one, again, relates to wildlife habitat connectivity that I mentioned earlier, and in particular, looking at the priority wildlife conservation areas that ODFW has mapped and incorporating those where appropriate within the FIP priorities. So summarizing that feedback, I'll turn this over to Denise and Eric to walk through the specific recommended changes for each of the FIP priorities. Start with Denise.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, co-chairs, members of the board. Denise Hoffer, Partnerships Coordinator. Also want to acknowledge my colleague, Jillian McCarthy, OWEB's other Partnerships Coordinator who couldn't be with us for this board meeting. She is facilitating one of our open solicitation regional review team meetings over the next couple of days. So, I'm going to be providing an overview of 5 of the 7 priorities, and Eric Hartstein will be providing an overview of the remaining 2. And I want to remind the board that each of these priorities includes a map, a memo, and a theory of change. And so for today's presentation, we're showing you the maps, we're giving you some highlights of the memos that we have drafts of those updates. And the theories of change will be updated by February when the solicitation will be opened. And just a reminder as well that these materials aren't the end point for our partners. This is really the starting point for them. These are the materials that they utilize when they're thinking about becoming a FIP and writing a strategic action plan, identifying where those priority areas are to do their work and what habitats to do that work in. And those partners then develop a strategic action plan that really gets into the specifics of their geography and the needs that their habitats have. And so OWEB is providing that a big picture, and though we rely on those partners and they work with their local technical experts to hone in on those specifics. So for example, our memo might be 3 to 4 pages long for this really big geography and a really big habitat and priority, but our partners will hone in on a really specific geography, really specific habitat needs, and develop a 200-page strategic action plan that outlines all of the needs that are specific and on the ground. So just kind of a reminder of the scale of what OWEB's providing and then what our partners come to us with. So we'll start here with the estuary habitat. We'll be working our way from west to east across the state. The first change is a really straightforward one. It's just a name change going from coastal estuaries in Oregon to estuary habitat. We don't fund work in Washington or California, so we only need to have Oregon in the name. So a straightforward name change here being recommended. Some alignment with the State Wildlife Action Plan, which will be adopted by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife when U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service accepts that plan, likely sometime in, early in the new year. We made some updates to the plans and links that are provided within that memo that I referenced, and some minor language updates throughout the memo. And then as Eric Williams described, the landscape scale disturbance and wildlife habitat connectivity that will be added to all the memos. This next priority is the one that has generated the most conversation in our listening sessions and the most conversations with our agency partners, and was what we received the most feedback on across the board. And that was to combine our coho habitat along the Oregon coast with our aquatic habitat for native fish species priority, primarily because the strategies to improve this habitat have significant overlap between these two. There isn't really a need to have these be separate. There is a need to maintain the estuaries connection in this priority, and we will be doing that in our theory of change, and it is in the memo. So this was
generated the most feedback, as well as, you can go to the next slide, the desire to expand this priority beyond just native habitat for aquatic fish species. We received significant feedback to incorporate other aquatic critters and their habitat needs. So that includes the western pond turtle, the Oregon spotted frog, and the western ridged mussel. So this map looks a little busy, and it takes a minute to fully digest the colors that are going on here. So bear with me as I describe what we're proposing here. The areas in blue represent the native habitat, or the habitat for aquatic species. And this is the high quality habitat. We removed the low and medium priority habitats from this map, so we're only showing those areas that are the highest priority. The areas that are the green dots are the habitat for Oregon spotted frog, and then that hashed lined greened area is the habitat for our northwestern pond turtle, and then the reddish brown is the western ridged mussel. So this map is representing all of these species. When this map gets brought online, it will have links so that it will be an active map that you can click on any of these basins, and then a pop-up will appear that provides what the state and federal recovery plans are, and what specific species are the target species for that geography. ODFW has provided us with an Excel table with all of that data that's really hard to provide in a digestible format for our memo, but is really easy to provide in a visual format in the map. And so that information will be available to our partners. And I'll stop here and let folks ask some questions.
Jesse.
I don't think you mentioned this, but the high, medium, low priority, was that ODFW that developed that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell me do you know what went into that?
Yes. Okay. I have to put my glasses on for that. So priority areas are based on fish conservation and recovery needs throughout the state, focused primarily on ESA listed fish species, but also considers salmon and steelhead on ODFW's sensitive species list. These species are identified as species of greatest conservation need in the updated State Wildlife Action Plan, known as the SWAP.
Thanks, Jesse. Then Liz, I have a question, then Russ. Okay.
Thank you, Denise. So I really like this idea of considering large landscape or landscape disturbance. And so you talked about adding it here as sort of you're putting the toe into the water. Are you trying to describe it in a general sense? Are you trying to be more specific? What's the strategy in inserting it, and what do you hope, it'll be the consequence of that?
We're doing this at the request of our partners who wanted to be able to have that flexibility within their FIP award if there were to be some sort of catastrophic disaster that occurred during the life of the FIP. It'll probably come more into play for some of our geographies that are really heavily impacted by fire, like our oak systems, our sage systems. But as like the partners from the Clackamas described yesterday, they had impacts from those Labor Day fires in 2020 that they had to work around. So just recognizing that things happen over the 6 to 10 year life of this investment that partners couldn't have predicted when they developed their strategic action plan. And if there are actions that they need to take and that they've thought through what those desired outcomes would be, that those would be eligible to come in through the FIP program. And I'll look to the Erics if they have anything they want to add to that.
I think you covered it well, Denise. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, my question is about the map on the east side. I'm sorry, maybe it's just that I can't see. Is that Western Ridge mussel habitat that's Yeah, on that side.
Yes.
Okay.
And we received this data from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So if you think there's some questions about the map, we're happy to relay those.
No, I just couldn't see the hash marks right here. I would have turned around. So my other question with this is, so the aquatic habitat for native species is going to be separate, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder or segue into the next thing, but it's gonna be still separate from the closed lakes basin because there are native species in those closed lake basins that they will be separate and it will be or will those native species be included? It's just it's very broad, and so I'm trying to figure out how we're categorizing everything with that.
So this does include the aquatic habitat for closed lake basin.
Okay. Thank you.
And before we move further, I do want to take a moment to recognize our colleague Paula Wills, who's our GIS specialist, who somehow managed to get all of this information on one map, and she did a fantastic job. And she did the other maps as well.
Thank you. Russ?
Thank you. This is really impressive. I just want to emphasize that in order to address the critical habitat needs that are out there, we have to acknowledge our reliance upon the vitality of Oregon's land use system. If we're going to be successful over the next 5 years, we cannot see degradation in the integrity of that if we're to meet these priorities that are identified. How do we do that?
Thanks, Russ.
They're looking at me, but I don't think it needed a response, right? That was a comment statement, so noted for the record. You weren't looking for a response from staff.
Liza Jane.
I'm not sure when to ask my question, so I'm just gonna do it now. So we're using new words and landscape. I think it's not a new word, but I think when we do that, landscape, a work stream, modernization, they deserve a definition. The public is gonna look at this and try and understand, not just partners and restoration people that understand these. So what does landscape, what do we mean when we say landscape scale? That could be Oregon, that could be, a valley. And then I have a question about the lamprey in here was sorted out, and could you help me understand that?
We don't have a map layer that's specific to lamprey, but lamprey actions that support lamprey wherever they occur are included in the FIP geography. So if there's a partnership that wants to do actions to benefit lamprey, those actions can be funded through their FIP.
We needed to call that out separately?
We were asked to by tribes in the update in 2020.
Okay.
I'm gonna chime in here on that one, Liza Jane, because I can't, if you're gonna ask a question about lamprey. The Fish and Wildlife Service should have maps if you need them or would like them for this particular FIP priority. I know that the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative worked very closely with Fish and Wildlife Service to map, like literally what we did when we first started doing lamprey work is put them on the map because we didn't know where they were. So that would be your best place for information on this if you need it.
Thank you.
I see no more questions. Go for it.
All right. So this is what we've already discussed, so we can move to the next priority. So our oak and prairie habitat, one of the most straightforward ones to review here, primarily just changing the name from oak Oak Woodland, excuse me, yeah, it's not on our map and it's not even on the old one anymore. Oak Woodland and Prairie to just oak and prairie, recognizing that oak woodland is a category of oak habitat. And so being comprehensive, just all oak, so sticking with oak. And you can go to the next slide. We're expanding upon the importance of both prescribed and cultural burning and first foods. There's been some updated linkages, again, to the State Wildlife Action Plan and updates to other reference plans in the priority memo. We removed the references in the current version of the memo that were about supporting aquatic ecosystems, as this isn't really a necessary connection to draw. Oak and prairie systems are a priority all in and of themselves. They don't have to be connected to aquatic systems in order to be a priority. So Kelly, I think it was you who asked the question about the closed lake basins. So they're still a standalone priority for this habitat type, but they are in the fishery, in the native aquatic habitat for those fisheries, like the Warner FIP is a FIP for those inland, to support that inland fish habitat. So this priority is still here. Our Harney FIP is in this priority.
Yes, Mark Webb.
Could you go back a slide to the last bullet point? What do you mean by included capacity for implementing prescribed and cultural burning as a higher priority limiting factor than community acceptance?
So we had some feedback from one of our partners at Oregon State Extension that has conducted a lot of research and has a lot of information about these practices, and is seeing that it's really community acceptance has really come a long way, and that the limiting factor now for doing these burns is around workforce development.
Okay, it wasn't to do these things regardless of community acceptance.
No.
Okay.
No. Just recognizing that the needs are.
I mean, I'm game for that.
Thanks, Russ.
So back to the oak map. I am curious if in your conversations with ODFW, Department of Agriculture in particular, and maybe Extension, what about other diseases that we're seeing moving through the state as a result of climate change and evolution? If you have thought more broadly about oak and other critical habitat that's going to impact the mission of the organization and modernization of the FIP.
So I believe that diseases in oak is called out in our memo as one of the limiting factors, and it is something partners talk about and are working to address.
Okay, so the other species beyond oak, were they addressed in the strategic action plan or other issues?
Yes, it is in the dry type forest priority in particular, and Eric's going to talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, that's my point, is has there been discussion about, from a climate perspective, as we're looking at priorities, has there been conversation about climate-related diseases associated with the loss of major habitats that we will see into the future beyond just the oak?
Not specifically in our listening sessions. We didn't specifically talk about impacts of emerald ash borer, but partners are recognizing that it's going to be a concern. It's a concern now. It's going to be a growing concern, and there are people developing, projects to address what they can. But we're not specifically calling it out in any of our other memos.
Okay,
Is there
so-
something that you have in mind?
Well, I guess the question is, we will see major loss of habitat over the next 5 years that will impact shade, temperature, and aquatic systems associated with these losses. And are there things we could be doing now from a FIP priority perspective that will mitigate those losses over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or talking about major habitat loss modification.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about riparian areas, for example, and you have an aquatic habitat FIP, doing some of that work in a priority riparian area would certainly be an eligible activity under that FIP to make sure that that riparian area remains resilient and adaptable to climate change. I think there were also some comments made about things like assisted migration for, what species to expect in the future. We didn't feel that that was really advanced to the point to be able to specify something in these ecological priorities to address that. But I think that topic is likely to come up in some of the partnerships activities in the future.
So we will hear from ODFW about the assisted migration strategies, I'm assuming in their presentation.
We can certainly check in with them. I think Mark and Russ both suggested separately that we invite ODFW over to present on the new State Wildlife Action Plan, and we're coordinating with them on timing for that, either January or April, but we can flag that for Habitat Division staff.
Thank you.
So this priority had very few changes. The map, the current map and the proposed map are the same, and just really minimal adjustments to this priority. And I'll turn it over to Eric Hartstein.
Thanks, Denise. For the record, Eric Hartstein, Senior Policy Coordinator. So the dry type forest habitat, so this covers those forests that historically experienced that low intensity but frequent forest fire that really resulted in a mosaic of older, larger trees and those young forest types. So what we have here is the map on the left that is from, I believe the data is from 2014 or 2015, and it's showing those dry type forest watersheds that are in need of disturbance restoration. So disturbance restoration includes things like ecological thinning, cultural burning, prescribed burning, and that map has been updated. The data comes from the U.S. Forest Service and I believe the University of Washington. And what we see here is quite a bit. If you're looking at those watersheds, the blue is watersheds that are in have a lower need for disturbance-based restoration, and kind of moving through the scale, you get to those pink and then the red. Those are higher need for disturbance-based restoration. So we're seeing in this data, which is from 2023 in the proposed map, still quite a bit of pink and red. There is a little bit more blue, and you look in places like South Central Oregon, places that have looked at transition from kind of that yellow to blue, and that's in fire footprints that have occurred since 2014, 2015. So next slide. Yeah, thanks. So in addition to the map in this proposed revision to the dry type forest habitat priority, based on comments received during the engagement process, including from the Department of Forestry and OSU Extension, the good folks at the fire program did provide extensive comments on this habitat priority. We revised the key limiting factors and the ecological threats pretty extensively, including that comment as well about the lack of land management capacity for prescribed and cultural burning. And we clarified that moist mixed conifer forests are also included within this ecological priority, and then updated linkages to the State Wildlife Action Plan and other reference plans.
Could you go back? So I think it's appropriate, at least on the mount here, there's a lot of moist mix included within something that's much drier. but they have different fire frequency return intervals and the like. I think maybe my question is more how these things tier to appropriate restoration activity. So it's probably not a question for now, so forget it. It took me verbally working that out.
Okay, I see Brian's hand online.
Yeah, I just want to kind of tee in on that. That was going to be one of my questions, and you answered it. I guess I just want to affirm the notion that I think it's important to include that moist mixed conifer in that priority domain, but also relevant to Mark's comment, some of the treatment strategies may differ in those places, but that's not really what we're addressing at this kind of level. So I appreciate that clarification through this process.
So I'm curious about the engagement with the BLM and the Forest Service in this process as it relates to the fire risk maps and the fire risk and the dry types in particular. Your return intervals for fire are going to be changing dramatically over the next 5 years. And have you looked at the unofficial fire risk map for the state of Oregon to help with assistance and prioritization of different geographies based upon risk and return over critical habitats?
We didn't look specifically at the unofficial fire risk map. I will say that when partnerships come in to apply under this ecological priority, they come in with their revised maps or their much more specific maps in the areas in that which they're working. And I know that they take into account some of the community needs around wildfire resiliency.
So specifically then back to the BLM and the Forest Service in terms of giving input on their detailed information on fire return intervals and risks, or what's the input that you're getting from our partners?
Oh, I'm just remembering the conversation we had with ODF about forest management looking forward in Oregon, and that we don't have forests that are going to be legacy forests. Like all forest is going to be experiencing significant change over time, and expect to see more catastrophic fire into the future. So that's just the comments from them that I was remembering.
So,
Brian, do you have your hand up again?
I do, because I kind of want to address Russ's question and comment. So I think it's, I'm a hydrologist. I'm not an expert in all of these products, but I know enough to be dangerous. And I guess my point is that the products that are being used here are looking at the structural composition of the forest and the age structure, as well as the structure of the vegetation. That is, and how it departs from historical regimes and such. So that's what is being used here. I think that's appropriate for this use. But I think an important consideration that is different than fire risk, which tends to look at not just the likelihood of a fire and what are the consequences of that fire to resources of interest like communities and things like that. So they're just different. Fire risk is different than what we're looking at here. I think is an important piece of this. There are some relations between the two, but they are not at all one and the same. And so I think it's a bit of an important framework for how we're prioritizing things. Is it around risk to communities, or are we really looking at the ecological kind of context there? So does that help, Russ, that's what we're really looking at, the vegetation departure?
Yeah, I was focusing in on habitat risk and alteration of those habitats and how we rank those habitats. But thank you. That's going to be important moving forward.
Okay. I see no additional questions.
Okay, so moving on to the sagebrush, sage steppe habitat in central and eastern Oregon. with this revised priority, we're really looking to kind of soften the focus on sage grouse. It's still very important, but we want to make sure that we're focusing on the habitat here. So what you see in the map on the left is the current sagebrush, sage steppe habitat map for the priority. And it includes the, in the kind of that mustardy yellow color and then the green color, those are the sage grouse core areas in the mustard color, and then the green is in the low density sage grouse. So on the map on the right, we received the ODFW updates for the sage grouse areas, and those are in the red and the hatch marks area, both with the core and the low density habitat. And then we also provided another layer, and these are the sagebrush areas. So that includes both the core sagebrush areas and then the growth opportunity areas. And this came from the Sagebrush Conservation Design Group. So it has a lot of partners to it, including OSU, Institute for Natural Resources, and USDA, Agricultural Research Service, and just a whole host of other folks have put together that data. So it covers quite a bit more of central and eastern Oregon, and there is a fair amount of overlap you'll see there between both the sage grouse and the sagebrush areas, which kind of makes sense given the habitat that the sage grouse like. But you also see areas like up in kind of northeast Oregon, there's quite a bit of sage grouse habitat identified, and there's a little bit less in the sagebrush areas. Similarly, down kind of south of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, you'll see quite a bit of that green. So there's either sagebrush core areas or growth opportunity areas for work. But for whatever reason, I'm not seeing a lot of sage grouse activity in those places. So kind of talked through both of these, the top two bullets already. But then we also included the linkages to the SWAP and other reference plans, and we did some kind of minor language updates throughout this revised priority.
I'm gonna do a quick time check here because it's 11:13 and we had until 11:15 for this item. Do you all have more that you would like to present before we go to questions?
We do, just a brief piece on the funding, because there will be a decision for you to make in January.
Perfect.
Regarding funding for FIPS.
Go ahead and let's hold questions until the end, okay?
Okay, so last few slides. So these are the next steps in this process. The rest of this fall, early winter, we will be continually to revise and finalize these ecological priorities. And we'll bring those to you for approval at the January board meeting. And along with that, we will also be asking you to determine the funding cap for FIP initiative applications for the next cohort of FIPs, which we will be soliciting for right after the board meeting in January. And as a part of that process, this winter through the spring, we'll be consulting with interested partnerships that are thinking of applying for the FIP program, and with a application deadline in July. And throughout the summer and early fall of 2026, we'll be convening the expert review team to look at those applications that were submitted. And then in the fall, November specifically, we'll have the Partnerships and Capacity Committee interview those cohort 5 applicants. And in January of 2027, the board will be selecting a cohort 5 partnerships to be funded. And at that point, OWEB staff will be working with those selected partnerships to do things like develop and sign their partnership agreement with OWEB and develop their internal technical review teams and really have everything ready to hit the ground running in July, when the board will actually be awarding funding with the new biennium to those cohort 5 partnerships. So the one thing that Eric mentioned that we do want to bring up, it's a little bit of a departure from the ecological priorities, but it's important because you will be considering this in January, and that is the cap for a cohort 5 FIPS. So historically, we had in administrative rule that the cap was $4 million per biennium for each partnership. The board removed that cap earlier this year when you approved the revised rules for the FIP program and said that you will then announce what that cap is going to be prior to soliciting for that, the next solicitation. So again, you're going to be making that decision in January. It won't be for today, but we wanted to provide a little bit of context and if you had questions or wanted to have a discussion about it. So this is a historical range of the FIP awards from cohorts 1 through 4. As Eric mentioned, we've had 20 FIP partnerships funded, so that's over 3 biennia each. So you're looking at, I think, 13 awards of $4 million. That was at the cap. 10 in the 3 to 4 million per biennium, 25 in the 2 to 3 million, 10 in the 1 to 2, and then there was a couple that were under $1 million. And then the next slide just kind of shows that in a little different way. Each bar is a different FIP partnership. So I think the takeaway here is that the trend line is moving up when you see what the FIPs have been requesting and awarded over time. And this is a really exciting slide about an inflation calculator that we had. So when the FIPs were first awarded in 2016 with that $4 million cap, we crunched the numbers, and in 2025, that $4 million cap would be just a little bit south of $5.5 million when inflation is taken into account. So with that, we can stop and see if there's further questions or discussion.
Okay. Sorry, that inflation number hit me really hard. I'm going to go with Bruce and then Russ.
Thanks. I have a comment regarding language and messaging. The sage grouse FIP, we've talked, every time over the last few years we've talked about sage grouse, it seems like it is, there is a preamble talking about a commitment of $10 million. And then we see numbers far in excess of $10 million. We don't do that for any other FIP in my memory. So every time that happens, I'm going, at what point, are we getting the messaging for sage grouse, now that it's expanded on what the FIP would include? I think we need to consider how we phrase the historic investment in that area for those ecological priorities. Every time it happens, I kind of sit back in my chair and go, gee, we're spending up more than we ever committed to, and that isn't the message that I think really that we want to be giving, because it's things have changed, and so anyway.
That does have a bit of a history to it, of course, and at the time that target was created, there was the threat of a listing of the bird And that commitment was part of a bigger package of things that held off a listing of that under the Endangered Species Act. And you're correct, we have far surpassed that. And I think we're probably going to stop reporting that to you, how much over the target that we are.
It's no longer germane.
Yes, agreed.
Russ.
So again, this gets to the state conservation strategy issue on the stage step. I have comments there. I like the idea of moving beyond the grouse to, I would call them sage obligate animal species. And understanding that the biggest threat to the place where we do in fact have very healthy habitat for the sage grouse is about 9 million acres. But you have very significant invasive species issues on those 9 million acres. And are we going to see in the next FIP a focus on the invasives and to active replanting of native species of understory plants to be able to meet those needs? I didn't get a sense of that from your presentation, but I would be curious to see what ODFW through the Wildlife Action Plans is actually focusing in on.
Well, I could just say that with the sage grouse or the partnerships that are funded under the sagebrush, sage steppe ecological priority right now are focusing on sage grouse conservation, and invasive annual grass treatments are probably at least 50, if not 75% of the activity that they're engaged in.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to see of the 9 million acres of the best habitat where the focus is going to be.
Yeah, and that will be determined also at that application level, where they will be showing where they're going to be focusing and talking in their work plan about the type of activities they're going to be engaged in.
I just want to make sure it's clear that because there are these 6 priorities that OWEB has set, that we aren't guaranteed to receive applications for all of these priorities from our partners, let alone be able to fund all of the partnerships that come in. So I don't want to presuppose what's going to be submitted and then what will be awarded. So we have a lot of partners listening to these conversations. So I just want to make sure that that's clear to them.
And the priority memo makes clear that what you're talking about, Russ, is one of the things that a FIP could and probably should address.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, I see Brian has his hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on my response to Russ earlier. I realized I was clarifying the ecological departure versus fire risk, but I didn't answer his question directly around interface with Forest Service priorities. So I want to address that piece. Those products that were presented, those science products, were developed in part by Forest Service scientists and other collaborators, and we do use those for prioritizing those kinds of treatments around restoring the structure and composition of the forest. So I think there's pretty strong alignment there from the Forest Service perspective. I can't speak directly to BLM though, so thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all so much for this update. I really appreciate it. What we are going to do, because we are at time for break, is we're actually just going to skip the break. So if you need to take a break, go ahead and do that as needed, but we're gonna move forward. Yes. No, Renee, you may not get water. So we're going to move on to agenda item L, land acquisition modernization update. And like I said, if you need to take a bio break, grab water, grab coffee, go ahead and do that as needed and then come back in.
Good morning. Again, for the record, Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager. Oh, it's okay. Miriam, I think, is on. Yes, I see her popping up. Good morning, Miriam. Okay, so we are covering the land acquisition modernization process. Agenda item L, page 83 of your ebook. Liza Jane, thank you for the question about what does modernization mean? What does work stream mean? So normally, I looked it up, modernization normally means an improvement to increase efficiency, improve customer service. So I think that holds true for this. And I also think that there are some pieces of this, especially related to board discussion of some deeper issues that probably goes beyond the traditional definition of program modernization, but just really important, I think, to address what have been some kind of chronic questions and issues for the program. So, if we could hold clarifying questions until the end, I think we can move through this quickly enough that we'll have time for that. Just as a reminder, not unlike with water acquisitions earlier, land acquisition is one of the key directives in the Constitution in terms of engaging with willing sellers to provide funding for local partners to work with willing sellers to acquire properties for the purposes of protecting habitat for native fish and wildlife species. So a little bit of background, and then we'll jump into some of how we got here to modernization. So since 1998, we've supported approximately 100 different land acquisition projects. Most of those have been fee simple projects, but we have had some number of conservation easement projects where a local partner organization will work with a willing landowner to place a conservation easement on a portion of property with the intent of habitat conservation. So our investment has been at around $60 million since 1998, and we've helped to conserve about 90,000 acres. So since the program inception in 98, we've had multiple rulemaking processes, and since 2013, and you'll see this in the first bullet, we've had additional other processes, listening sessions, facilitated processes to get at what are some challenges that have been identified about the program and what some opportunities might be for program refinement. So I would say that is certainly one of the prompts for the modernization. More directly, in I think August or September of 2024, Director O'Brien did receive an email from Governor Kotek with multiple different points in terms of a charge to her as a new director. One piece of that was specifically related to the land acquisition grant program and requesting a review of the program to look at where there might be some unnecessary or non-essential components that have been added in over the years that might be impacting program demand or customer service. But since that time, Sarah has done a great job of articulating, I think, to the board, to staff, to local partners, ideas and a vision that she has in terms of a more integrated program structure and just overall more accessible customer service experience for all of OWEB's grant programs, not just land acquisition. So that's some of the context of how we got here. So the what is a work plan with multiple process streams, or work streams. We'll talk about that soon, Liza and Jane. But I'll describe a little bit some of the information gathering that we did to help inform the work plan. So starting in fall of 24, working with code, and again, huge thanks to Coalition of Oregon Land Trust, to Joe and Carson for helping to convene a few listening sessions, do some surveying of their staff to really get at what has been addressed by some of those past processes, but what are some of the persisting issues that folks are concerned about. That information, and we'll talk shortly about the buckets that I mentioned up there of issues and opportunities, that's really nicely complemented by multiple touch points that we've had with federally recognized tribes, starting back in 2021 with the tribal assessment that looked across OWEB's grant programs again, some work in the Partnership Learning Project in 2023, and then a big lift that Eric Williams, Ken Fetcho, and Liz Redon did in 23 and 24 to have specific individual conversations with the federally recognized tribes to better understand what some of the pinch points were around land acquisition specifically. So all of this was really helpful information to feed into what are some of those persisting issues. So we have put these into 3 buckets, and thank you, Linda, for your distinct buckets that you've provided here. So philosophical, cultural, and process are generally the buckets that we've put these persisting issues into. So I'll describe those in turn. So Philosophical, so I know that the ARE committee members who are sitting here are very well versed, so thanks to all of you for your patience as we walk through this for other board members. So some of the key philosophical questions are issues around what is kind of the base expectation for a proposed acquisition project coming into the program. We talk about significant habitat. What is significant enough habitat to come into the land acquisition program? If you come in and maybe the habitat is more marginal or less significant, then what are the expectations around restoration to get to certain conservation values? So some questions around, is that philosophically where we should be? So the second philosophical question is really focused on what we're calling other uses. So that could include recreational uses, working lands, cultural uses, and really what is that balance? How do you strike that balance between conservation purposes, which is the intent of the Measure 76 funding, with other uses? Because there isn't a formula where you can plug in information and easily get an output at saying this much is too much or this much is okay. And then the third issue is around, we do have a title restriction statute, which all of you may remember we talked about at length in July in Pendleton with Contact Council. So we have a title restriction easement or a title restriction statute requirement that we will hold some type of title restriction. We've chosen to use conservation easements on fee simple projects to ensure those conservation values are delivered. And questions have come up. Is that the only title restriction that could be used? Are there other instruments that are warranted? So that's the philosophical bucket. Cultural, a range of issues addressing barriers to tribal participation and access. And I would say that the tribal topic writ large connects back to philosophical and then forward to process. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the tribal work stream. Questions around risk tolerance and risk management. What is that risk tolerance threshold that the agency set, and is there some space for discussion around that? Customer service experience overall, and then these are really kind of board level issues. Is there more kind of board discussion or education needed around topics such as budget or spending plan allocations is how I should describe that, not budget. And so we do have multiple process examples in that process bucket. I'm not going to read all of these, but just a few of those examples. So desire for more transparency in the project soundness review. How are funding requirements, including title restrictions, mesh with other funders' programs and some of the interoperability challenges that local partners have faced? Level of detail and management plan and the process for changes. So that kind of gives you a sense of the philosophical, cultural, and process feedback that we've received that fall into those buckets. So we kind of broadly have described the persisting issues as conservation easement requirement, tribal sovereignty considerations, required habitat conditions, both present and future, other uses, and then risk tolerance. So now we get to the work plan with multiple process streams. So we're calling them work streams. That's basically a set of tasks. I looked that up too, Liz Jane. A set of tasks associated with a specific project. We are calling them work streams because we want to help, I think, everyone involved in this, ARE committee, board, local partners, staff, understand there is a lot under the hood of this, so it's taking some time, and these are meaty issues. So we appreciate already the ARE committee's commitment that you've shown in digging in on these topics. So the work streams are ARE committee work. The expectation for that committee is to have an opportunity for a deeper dive into some of these issues, translating information, and ultimately recommendations to the full board, and sharing learnings, since you have the opportunity to do that deeper dive in committee. The tribal work stream, which is really intended to specifically focus on some of those issues that, one, have been raised by tribes. There is overlap with what we've heard from other local partners, but also not losing. There is a very specific sovereignty consideration that we need to have on those tribal discussions, and so wanting to make sure we hold space for that. 3 initial streamlining in advance of the grant cycle that we're in the process of reviewing, and then a placeholder for potential rulemaking. So I'm going to give quick updates about each one of those. And at any point, Miriam, Sarah, please chime in because I'm moving through this pretty quickly. So the ARE committee work stream, that committee has been incredibly busy. So again, thank you to Dan and Russ and let's see, Mark Webb and Kelly and Bruce, Bruce, we will miss you very much on that committee. And right now. So in March, we just had an orientation to the some of the feedback and that we received, issues that have come up, and then high level discussion of the work plan. In June, we actually convened a set of the folks who were involved in initial writing of measures 66 and 76 to understand what some of those intentions were around the constitutional language that then translated into statute. We did a review of the 4, what we're calling foundational questions, so use of conservation easements, habitat expectations, other uses, risk tolerance. We planned for just 1 fall meeting, but had 2. So we had the September meeting, which Russ did an excellent job reporting on. Thank you for that. Talked about different types of risks, had a panel with grantees, and then had a deeper dive into the conservation easement use to meet that statutory title restriction. And then I would credit Dan in particular for saying we need some time as a committee to just work through some of these, talk about with one another, some of these meaty topics. So we added an hour-and-a-half meeting last week for the committee to do exactly that. Hopefully we won't have too many additional interim meetings, but we'll see. And then December, that was mentioned too, we will be convening a tribal panel to hear thoughts on a range of issues, not only significant habitat, but I'm sure conservation easement issues and maybe other uses, and then a deeper dive into significant habitat and future conditions. March, diving into other uses, recreation, cultural uses, working lands. And June, we had a placeholder for risk tolerance. Risk tolerances have been woven through all of the conversations thus far. So we may still do something with risk in June, but I think that it's being treated in each of these other meetings. Second work stream is tribal. So again, I mentioned the past work with federally recognized tribes, really focusing on some of those substantive and process issues that tribes have raised previously. Did some work, which we also talked about in Pendleton in July, to basically understand what are some of the legal options available to the agency or not available, depending on statutory constraints for land acquisition grants as it specifically relates to tribal sovereigns. And then in early October, Director O'Brien sent a letter to each of the 9 federally recognized tribes, plus the Nez Perce tribe, summarizing the key themes that we've heard through those multiple touch points, and then beginning to lay out what are some of the policy options to help address barriers that have been raised. And so at the request of the ARE committee, we are beginning to merge where appropriate the tribal work stream with the ARE committee stream. The December panel is a good example, but again, holding space as appropriate for those more government to government conversations outside of the committee context. Initial streamlining for the 2025 cycle. This one I will need to refer to my notes so I don't forget anyone. So we kicked off in the spring a very well-scoped, well-sideboarded initial streamlining process for the land acquisition program materials, essentially grant application, early guidance materials to applicants to the program. So that part of this was in response to direction for all of OWEB's grant programs in the letter to Director O'Brien from the governor about streamlining opportunities, figuring out how to increase customer service. But not getting out in front of this board process on modernization, so not making big decisions on philosophical issues. So had an internal work group and convene an external work group also to help us work through some of those streamlining opportunities in the April through July timeframe, and then rolled out the materials. It was small but mighty, I would say, in terms of some of those initial opportunities for streamlining. Oh, nope, didn't look at my notes. So just want to recognize we had partners from multiple land trusts. We had staff from the section that I manage, also Katie Duzick and Denise participated in the internal work group. It was definitely one of those other duties as assigned on top of a lot of work that staff already have. So just thanks for the commitment to, that folks made in a pretty short period of time to do some of that streamlining. For the land acquisition cycle, this was mentioned, I think, in public comment. So the cycle ran for about a month, mid-August to mid-September, 9 grant applications requesting over $12 million in funding and proposing nearly $12 million in match, 7 fee simple projects, 2 conservation easement projects, spanning from Southwest Oregon up here to the North Coast, over into Central and Eastern Oregon and South Central Oregon. So spanning 4 of the agency's 6 regions. So that's exciting. By number alone, the last time we had this number of applications was back in the 2013-2015 biennium. So it's exciting that there's program demand. Also a little bit heart-wrenching, because I think some of that is just uncertainty about federal funding. So we understand the challenges facing local partners. Due to the volume of applications, we haven't seen this many applications in years. We have deployed a team approach for the 2025 land acquisition review process. So Miriam, of course, is leading the charge on things. So thank you for that. We've also brought in Robin Meacher, our OHP CE specialist, Audrey Squires, drinking water specialist. We are working with the RPRs in the 4 regions. We have admin staff who are providing amazing support. Stephanie and Taylor Larson are helping with public hearings. So it is absolutely taking a village to do this, given that we have pretty quick turnaround time and we have a multi-part review process. So just wanted, though, to share that update. Those recommendations will be coming to the board in April in Jacksonville. And then the last work stream is around rulemaking. Again, this is a placeholder. We know as you all are working through the modernization process, first at the ARE committee and then with the full board, there will be opportunities and direction to do some program updates. We don't know yet what those look like. It could involve need to open administrative rules. We certainly will need to likely update grant program materials, processes. It could be that there's interest in refreshing the land acquisition principles and priorities document that's, I think, vintage 2004. So I think just as we have this January to April timeframe mentioned, the ARE committee is digging deep on this. So we expect that probably by the next meeting, you'll be getting some updates. We're not going to commit to a specific time with recommendation because we need to give the committee space that you all need to work through those topics. So we'll follow their cue. So with that, I think Miriam, Sarah, anything I missed? And do you want me to go back a slide?
No, it's okay. I have just a brief addition of detail. And Renee, I think that was I could not have improved on your delivery of concise and detailed information. So thank you for that. I just wanted to note, as we talked a little bit in our July conversation about the tribal work stream and communications going out to tribes at that time, the offer there is to proceed down a route as each individual tribe prefers, of big C consultation, little c consultation, contact with staff, contact with council. We learned at the government to government state tribal summit a couple of weeks ago, there are a lot of C's. In addition to consultation, there is communication, there's coordination, there's collaboration. And we are offering all those routes and recognizing the different tribal governments may likely choose different levels of engagement and types of engagement on each of those routes. So I'm looking forward to hearing back from folks what the preferred route is for sharing ideas, and recognizing that, but folks have a different level of interest in accessing this program and a different level of concern with the existing program as it's structured. And so that may look very different for each individual tribe. In case there are any tribal staff, in the room or listening at this time.
Thank you, Renee. And I would follow up on that, Sarah. I was one of those people that received the letter, wearing my day job hat. And I really appreciated how it was worded. There was a lot of thought that went into that, and it was a really great invitation to have the conversation. So just want to thank OWEB staff. Renee, Sarah, other staff, Ken especially as well, for your thought with that and engagement. So looking forward to the tribal panel in December as well. And just hearing the feedback that you all get from the tribes on how we can come together and find a solution for this. So really great. Okay, Renee.
Formal presentation is complete, unless Miriam, anything to add that I missed? Okay, so happy to answer questions if you have them.
Okay.
Renee, you blinded them with science.
I sometimes do that with my pace of speech, so.
Russ, don't feel like you have to ask a question because nobody else
It's a
did.
comment, it's just,
Okay.
again, you could see through the quality of the presentation how we are all benefiting with the really genuine, deep commitment of the staff to this process. And I just, again, want to thank you so much for your hard work.
Liza Jane.
Thank you. Also, the committee work. You know, we didn't have committees. We kind of had committees. We really have committees. And reading through what's expected of those committees, adios, right? Like, yeah, you all have your work cut out for you, and thank you for doing that. I think it's bringing everybody's expertise to use. So, yeah.
Thanks, Liza Jane. Dan?
I was just gonna say, board members who aren't part of the committee, if you're not asking questions now, we don't want to hear anything from you when we come to you with a recommendation.
I had a much lighter version of that to offer, Dan, which is I hope that members that are not on this committee feel like this is a toe dip and a little bit of a warning that there is more of this coming. And so we wanted to, start to get you used to the water temperature here and know what it feels like to be in this water. And then, a substantial wave of additional information and questions will come your way early next year.
Dance was better.
Well said, well said.
Yeah, I like Dan's better.
I'm not the best at delivery.
Straightforward. I appreciate it. Okay, not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Renee. Okay, moving right along, we are going into agenda item M, other business.
If, Linda, would you be willing to set us up with, I think it was the last two slides of my director's report, starting with your serial communication slide. Well, we're getting that together. So I have just two quick slides, one of which is a friendly reminder, and I mean it this time on serial communications. You guys have been so careful that I'm going to use the slide this time to tell you it's okay to talk to people. And so I'll share that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the next meeting. And then Liza Jane, you asked for a little time at the end, and Bruce too. So I will move through that quickly while we're getting set up. I was very remiss in my director's report to not mention the John Day Basin Partnership recently received the State Land Board Award, or I forget exactly how it's phrased, but a very high-functioning land conservation partnership in the state, one of three in the state. There was an incredible article in the Blue Mountain Eagle recognizing that partnership and its work. Great photo with partners with the governor and state treasurer and state secretary of state. So huge kudos to our John Day Basin Partnership partners. I think OWEB staff may have played a little role in nomination there. So really appreciate the work they're doing, and we can send that article out to board members. So Linda helped us cheer this up a little bit with some Fruit Loops. We've been talking about serial communications and public meeting law for a while now, and I appreciate the diligence with which members are minding their P's and Q's on this. A reminder that this applies to voting members. It does not particularly apply to non-voting members who come and vote and, who don't come and vote, and so they are not building up to a business action. You guys are being so careful that I want to let you know that there is this column of safer things to do that the Department of Justice and the Oregon Government Ethics Commission have communicated to us this remains very safe behavior despite, increasing concerns about serial communications among public meetings law. I really want to welcome and encourage board members to interact directly to staff, to come through Nicole and I, and to be, open to pre-meeting conversations with us, to come to us if you have questions or concerns, if you need information in advance of a meeting. We are trained in this stuff. We will never act as a serial communications risk. If you share information with us, we will keep it and make sure that we don't create a concern there. Similarly, the co-chairs have taken the training and are know how to mind those P's and Q's carefully. Please do feel free to individually contact co-chairs if you have questions or concerns in between meetings. Requesting information, hearing opinions from the public is a big part of your job as ambassadors into our broader community. And this is the part where I heard concerns or questions from a couple of board members between meetings. Oh, is it okay for me to meet with partners? Is it okay for me to meet with the general public and hear questions or concerns or thoughts or recommendations? And the hearing mode is 100% safe, right? Like, that's part of your job, and we really want to encourage you to continue to do that. The point at which you shift into what we have heard described from OGEC as riskier behavior is the point where you would start to talk with another individual board member or multiple individual board members about your plan to vote or your perspective on business actions coming up in upcoming meetings. We recommend avoiding that because of the potential for serial communications, even below quorum. And we're happy to bring in, if folks are looking for additional guidance or perspective on that, we do have access and, in fact, I think a requirement to attend the Oregon Government Ethics Commission training. But I'm not going to scold you on it today. I want to remind you that part of your job is to be ambassadors for the board and for the public. And I appreciate the care and I appreciate folks taking this seriously. And I don't want it to undermine our ability to engage with partners and hear what partners have to say, or for folks to feel that this is a barrier to coming to me or to engaging with staff. So I want to be clear that that's okay. It is still okay to do all that stuff. It's an important part of what we do together. Next meeting.
Could I just make a comment?
Yeah.
On that? I just want to thank you for keeping us focused on the serial communications issue. We have taken the training, but what I've recognized in the acquisition restoration review process, that challenging the staff to allow us to have additional meetings, public meetings, requires additional staff time, but it is a way to get broader input from the committee as well as the public. So there are avenues for us to be able to have the public input and still meet our goals and be effective as committee and board members.
I appreciate that, Russ, and we were so glad you guys requested that time. I think our only concern was to be able to schedule, and that turned out to be easier than we expected to get committee members available for that. So we were happy to host that additional conversation. I think it is part of what we hear from DOJ and ethics and others is we're just going to get used to having conversations in public that used to be in private, and that was the intent of the legislation to start with. And so we may need more time and more openness to talking about tough issues in public. So coming up in January, this is our not traveling meeting, right? The snowman was up there a second ago, and that's why we don't travel in January. We will have a packed full virtual meeting. So bring your, if you have like one of those little exercise bicycle things you can ride at your desk or something like that, it's going to be a lot of virtual meeting. Because of the change in grant cycle for open solicitations, we'll have grant awards both for that and our forest collaboratives. Ken and Kelly will come and talk about the annual tribal report. I know there were some questions that came up early in the meeting about the role of the tribal representatives. So we can bring some additional information on that at that time. We will seek a board vote on the ecological priorities conversation that you got a head start on today. We think there will be some initial recommendations from the Land Acquisitions Committee. It's possible that we'll have some more processing to do either during or after that meeting. So I think our initial timeline had us anticipating a request to start rulemaking in January, and I think that was starting to make the committee a little bit nervous. that we were heading into that timeline. So we'll see how our December meeting goes and see whether we feel like we're ready to bring that here for initiating rulemaking or pursuing recommendations or not. I hope a number of members had a chance to meet Raya Bushnell last night from Farmers Conservation Alliance, our new appointed and confirmed member that will join us starting in January. She knows a lot about irrigation modernization and water quantity. So as we were working through the panel today, I thought, boy, that'll be a great addition to the expertise we already have on the board as we head into our water acquisition cycle coming up. Again, waiting to see if our other appointed member is confirmed by the Senate, but if so, we'll expect to have Xavi Borges with us in January as well. So that's a lot of January. Throughout 2026, as I mentioned, we'll come up with a little sort of broader arc like we did for this year, but big picture issues that you can expect in front of the board in 2026 definitely include capacity grant rulemaking. Those engagement efforts are already underway, and we know those will be some very robust conversations, so much even deeper than what you learned about water acquisitions today. We will be talking about organizational capacity and how that fits within our Measure 76 mandate, and possibility of a start to land acquisitions rulemaking, and as always, a lot of grant decisions. And as you've been warned in this meeting, we hope to see an uptick in lottery revenue because we are certainly seeing an uptick in applications, and we want to be able to meet and help support partners during this time of high demand and low supply for conservation funding. So we'll see how the December revenue forecast comes out. We'll hope that we come to you with a little better news on that than last time. And you will have a lot of grant making to do in the new year. So it is hard to believe that I will see some of you next in 2026. And with that, unless there are questions, I want to hand the mic over to our departing members. That sounds very sad. I'm in denial, you guys. I don't know.
Woody has a question.
Do we have a date for the January meeting yet?
We do. It should be on the calendar. And Nicole is coming to the microphone to talk to us about this.
Hi, everyone, behind the scenes. Nicole.
Can you introduce? Yeah, thank you.
Nicole Vetnardi, I'm the Executive Assistant Board Liaison, as you all know, to put on the record when our next meetings are. So our PAC committee meeting is December 2nd, 9 to 10:30 a.m. Our TACO meeting, the tracking one, December 10th, 9 to 10:30. ARE, December 11th from 9 to noon. That one is extended. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And then our board meeting is January 27th and 28th. All of those meetings will be virtual. So there you go. Any questions? No? Great.
How about the April meeting?
April meeting, off the top of my head, it's going to be April probably 28th and 29th. It's Tuesday and Wednesday, the last ones of April. And that will be in Canyonville.
And the meetings will usually be that last week of the month?
So I work with the other liaisons of the other natural resource agencies that you all represent, or some of you represent, and we make sure that we don't have any overlap. I am pretty consistently aiming for one of the last 2 weeks of those quarterly months that we meet on. So typically, we're aiming for the last ones, but it doesn't always land it. So it's going to be one of the last two of the meet. But it should be already on your calendar. As soon as I select the dates, I populate all of your calendars already. And Lindsay knows.
How do I access my calendar?
I'm not going to be your IT person. I refuse to get into that.
We're going to need to take that offline.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Canyonville starts at 8:30.
Yeah, we're going to, obviously the agenda is not set yet. It's going to be around when the tour ends up being, but yeah. Okay.
Okay, Bruce, are you going first?
Yep. I'm starting to pick up finally the lingo And so I would like to talk about lessons learned. First, I would like to comment on my COVID cohort, Liza Jane. It has been such a pleasure to work with somebody with such passion and purpose and competence and an almost inexhaustible supply of civility. Thank you for that. I have worked with two commission and board members, Holly Atkinson and Liza Jane, who have draft animals. They know how to work a team. And I think that's a skill set that every board, every commission should have at least one person that can drive things forward. Every time I look at or think about Liza Jane, I hear the still silent voice of my mom saying, "Why can't you be more like Liza Jane and leave things better than you found them?" And I go, "Fine, Mom, I'll try." But anyway, remember, your rod and your staff shall comfort you. I'll see you on the river. I'd like to say something about our staff. I continue to be amazed. You all are consummate professionals. I see this over and over and over, and I'm so proud. You're great people. Now, it's odd that your main job is to give away money. And yet you always seem to be modestly surprised that people want to be your friends. I will say that you give public service a good name. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I have never been more convinced in the wisdom of the Oregon way, the boards and commissions system that we have. It's a strange system. We get, if you want to serve on a board, you get nominated by the governor. You have to go through a circus of Senate confirmation. And then you realize that, wait a minute, your boss is really the people of Oregon. You don't work for the governor, you don't work for the Senate, you work for the people of Oregon. We are public at large members. So when that happens, we have to start to understand that our lane of authority and responsibility is clearly outlined in statute. So we need to understand that part. And then once we understand that part, you will learn, if you're paying attention, you'll learn pretty quickly that it's important to stay in your lane. Also, it's as important to protect your lane with the same vigor as a NASCAR driver. So do what we do. Do it well. Stay committed. All you have to do is accomplish the mission statement, fulfill the resolutions, and have fun. Thanks a lot.
I'm a fan of the Irish goodbye. But unfortunately, I'm Scottish. Bruce, the words that I keep from you are not from my mother, they're from you, and it's called set the hook. I'm not very good at it, but I'm working on it. I had to write some things. I wrote them this morning. And it's just, and Lindsay, it's gonna happen, right? I want to express my deep, deep, deep gratitude to serve as a member
of the OWEB board for the past 8 years. But that's not where my experience started. My family had the very good fortune to work with Kobe Minton and the Grand Ronde Model Watershed Council to be the recipient of the OWEB project support to help us move the Wallowa River from a channelized convenient river into a winding, cluttered, beautiful home. Stop it. For salmon, and similar to the Klamath, we all built it and they came within weeks. We learned a lot from that experience and we wanted to do more, so we did. Another mile of restored river with side channels, floodplains, deep pools, and lots of shade trees. It's become a very good home for fish, but so much more. It's difficult to put into words the impact that saying yes can have. The parts we know because it's all connected. Clean, cold water for bugs to feed fish and birds to eat them, and they have more trees to build nests in. We have eagles and herons nesting now, beavers, otters, elk, deer, raccoons, fox, salmon, steelhead, trout, whitefish, dace, sculpin. But there is unexpected results on people, especially my family. The work we agreed to took me down a rather long trail that most likely I would not have taken. I've toured hundreds of people through the projects to help them understand the value of doing this work. I've talked to and connected with those people. We've done documentaries, storyboards, so many articles, videos, sat on panels and gave speeches. We received the State Land Board Award for this work, shook the governor's hand. We did all this together with you. Over the last few years, didn't learn how to run computers. So over the last few years, the Nez Perce fisheries bring hundreds of spawning Chinook to our stretch every summer. ODF&W placed a pit tag reader next to my chicken coop to hopefully count some of the 500,000 coho juveniles they released above us when they return in a few years. The Nez Perce tribe has promised to bring us lamprey next year. I'm telling you all this because I hold OWEB responsible for all of that. And I'm so, so grateful. What I'm most grateful for is what you've given to my children, my grandchildren, and hopefully many more generations that will be caring for our piece of land. There are no words. You've all inspired me and taught me so much. Thank you. I started yesterday saying it feels more like when I was in school and I didn't want to learn about history, but I wanted to see my friends. With this board, I get both. You've become my friends, and what I can offer you always will be my friendship. So thank you.
I'm not crying, you're crying. Thank you both, Bruce and Liza Jane, so much for your service and for your friendship and for your mentorship and your patience and your guidance and your thoughtfulness. We're really gonna miss you all. And I hope that you both get to fish in solitude and have a little bit more time for the fun things. Okay, is there any?
I think we better adjourn so everybody can give us some Kleenex.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending the meeting, either viewing us on YouTube or for those of you that made the drive up here across the state, thank you so much. Safe travels on your way home, everyone. And I just want to say thanks to everybody. Thanks for all the hard work that we all do. I feel like that was really, really evidenced at this meeting. I think we were able to celebrate some big wins as well in the face of some challenges. And so just thank you all so very much. Linda, I also just have to call out your slides. I love those slides so much. They're so great. And I also want to end by saying, I don't know about any of you guys, but I'm about to go home to some kids that are probably pre-sugared up for Halloween. So happy Halloween, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we will see you all later. Thank you.